It had been years since I had last kept in touch with Steven, and I wish now that it had stayed that way. Steven and I first met in primary school. Even at 9 years old each, we were often teased and bullied because we weren't like the other children. We had no interest in sports and listened to rock and metal music. We played musical instruments in video games, not football or hockey. We were shy around people, and all that we really had were each other. We were seen as outcasts at such an early age. And yet this didn't bother us. To this day, it still doesn't really. Yeah, okay, sometimes I detested the teasing and ridiculing, but I had a happy childhood. My parents treated me well and I was never sick. The strange fact about me is that I've never broken a bone, nor have I had a serious illness. I've had the odd head cold and stomach bug, but nothing too serious. My sister was 2 years older than me, 2 years and a month to be exact. She dressed and acted what most people would have described as a tomboy. She always looked out for me, stood up for me, heck, even beat people up for me. As I got older, I got better at standing up for myself. What I lacked in body strength, I made up for in intelligence. Not to sound cocky or anything. People who would insult me, I would just either ignore or tell them what I thought of them. I used big words that nobody could really comprehend at the age of 14. They would just blurt out something unoriginal and stupid like, "Yeah, well, you're stupid," and whatnot. Yeah, brilliant. As I got older, I began to get accepted again. Steven was always accepted by people in secondary, but for me it seemed to take a while. Around the age of 16, if I recall, I guess people just mature. However, it was around this time that Steven had started acting strangely. It was nothing too major, heck. Back then, I didn't even see it as a problem. He started growing a huge interest for psychology, the study of the human brain, of course. He would often go and play tricks and mind games on people, asking people questions and testing them. I remember one day I was queuing at the vending machine for my daily Mars bar, and he came over and asked me, "Would you be willing to skip to the front of the queue right now if there was only one Mars bar left?" My answer instantly was, "No, of course not." People in my school often did skip the queue, but I never really did. I guess I'm just not that type of person. It didn't really bug me. His reply is what got me though. "Ah, but you see, your subconscious is telling you that the people in front of you are younger than you. They're inferior to you. You could easily knock them all out of your way and they will be helpless to stop you. However, society sees this act as uncivilized, cruel, unsophisticated if you wish." This response had startled me a little, but I brushed it off. I probably should have told somebody looking back on it. The time for college came around and, surprise, surprise, Steven did a course in psychology. I wanted to go to the same university as him to do studies in human resource management, but I didn't get the requirements, so I ended up going to another college instead. We often kept in touch every weekend. He was still the same old Steve, a great laugh, a nice guy, big heart. Very sincere and brutally honest at times, but that was what I loved about him. His love of psychology continued to grow and grow and grow. Sometimes he would talk about their experiments when we were with our group of friends. Some of them were disturbing, such as the prison experiment. There were others that were very brutal that I don't really want to go into. But anyway, we were still the best of friends into our 20s. He met the girl of his dreams and dated her for 7 months before popping the question. Her name was Emily. It was all a bit soon, I thought, but I was happy for him. He treated her like an absolute princess. He was her knight in shining armor. They adored each other. I was a proud best man, passionately delivered a speech, around 6 minutes if I remember correctly, and the ceremony was beautiful. I regret to say that after that, I didn't see him much. I only got to communicate every few weeks or so, which turned into months, which then turned into years. It had been 6 years since I had last heard from him. Often, I had forgotten about him. My job as a health and safety manager had gotten in the way. I was often busy during weekdays, and I shared a small flat with 3 of my workmates, Paul, Rita, and Alexandria. It was a very city-centered-like apartment. A large window in the sitting room gave way to a great view of the city. All the skyscrapers unintentionally decorated the place. Strange modern art portraits on the walls. It was simple but nice. It had everything that you needed. We went out to nightclubs and pubs most weekends, and we were all good buddies. I hadn't seen my high school friends for years at that point. One weekend in a particularly cold March, Rita, Paul, and Alexandria had went for a week away to Greece. They were staying with Alex's mother, so I had the whole weekend and the flat to myself. So I decided that I would get in touch with my old buddy Steven. I still had his cell phone number, and his wife's one for that matter, so I called both numbers. Neither answered. In fact, both of them went straight to voicemail. I decided to chat him on Facebook. He wasn't online, and so I sent him an email. Upon doing so, I scrolled through his page, and it was then that I realized that the last post that he had up was over 4 years ago. Wow, he must have just gone off it. I never really shook off the Facebook fad. Even now, I find myself on it every day and putting up stupid statuses. With a whole weekend free, I decided that I would drive out to his house and catch up. There was no way that he had moved houses. He definitely would have told me if he had. He always informed me of almost everything big in his life. I was the only guy he told that he was going to marry Emily. They had now been together 9 years if my memory serves me correctly. I hoped by driving out that I wasn't intruding or anything. After all, the 2 of them and myself got on very well. So it was decided. With that, I packed my bags, nothing to lose really in case he asked me to stay the night, and I hopped into my Volkswagen and I hit the open road. I still remembered the way to his house, and it was only a 40-minute drive from my apartment, an hour if there was traffic, but I highly doubted there would be at noon on a Saturday. The drive had taken a little longer than I had expected. The area which he lived was still affected by a few inches of snow. The salt trucks must not highly regard this community. A pity, as it was a wonderful neighborhood. Wealthy 1950s housing, very classy looking, quite large, wisteria lane almost. Trees lined the paths on the route. The snow just brought out the best of it. As I arrived to his house, it instantly stood out from the rest, but not for a good reason. His house was dark and the color had badly faded. The grass was long and messy. It looked like nobody had been there for years. The same car from 6 years ago when I last saw him was still in the driveway, however, a shiny Audi A4. The time had done it no favors, though. Weeds rather than flowers decorated the lawn. After analyzing the garden, only then had I realized that the windows were all boarded up. I had missed my chance. Why didn't he tell me that he was gone? Why had he left his car here? I had to find out. Luckily enough for me, his neighbor was doing the gardening. I approached him, a tall, skinny man in his 60s. He wore a flowery hat and a plain white shirt. He was smiling and he looked friendly. "Excuse me, but could you tell me where exactly Steven is now?" I inquired. "Oh, I don't think he's been there for a while now," he replied. "Strangest thing is nobody ever saw him leave. The whole family just seemed to disappear. People behind the house say that they only ever saw Steven in the top floor room, and one day, he just disappeared." "That's strange," I stuttered. I was getting anxious now. He answered, "Yep, anytime that anybody called over, nobody answered. Things used to be different. I remembered they used to be great neighbors, and then one day things just kind of changed." He looked at the ground in confusion as he said and then wandered inside. I had to know what was going on. I took a closer inspection of the house. I got an eerie feeling from it. It was like it was watching me. It sounds ridiculous, but that's the truth. I noticed, however, that the garage door was open. I could see a door leading inside of the house. I looked around to see if there was anybody watching me. Nobody. I hesitantly walked towards the garage. About halfway up the drive, I noticed security cameras following my every move. He was always a secure person, but this looked like a nice neighborhood to me. So what was going on here? The garage was pretty normal to me, regular enough. A shelf of tools, old junk that you never threw away lying around, dusty old cardboard boxes and whatnot. I placed my hand on the doorknob that gave me entry to this house. Twisted. No lock. I searched around the garage in hope of finding a key. I looked through old paint cans, in drawers and on shelves. Nothing. After standing there for a while thinking that I had reached a dead end, I got an idea. As I mentioned earlier, I was never a man of strength or brute force. However, now was the time that I needed it most. I took a few steps and I ran full force into the brown dirty door. Ouch, my shoulder. I repeated my actions. Same result. Finally, I took a few more steps back and I jumped straight into it. The door flung open with me still going full speed through it. I was not expecting a narrow hallway to greet my head. But again, ouch. As I stood up from the door, which was now diagonally standing from its bottom frame to the hallway ceiling, I slipped awkwardly through one of the gaps that I had created. I studied the house that I was now in. It was definitely not how I remembered it. He had completely let his home go. The floorboards were rotting, dust and cobwebs everywhere, broken frames and pictures scattered across the floor, appliances covered in dirt and grime, but the first thing I noticed was the smell. Disgusting, I must say. Have you ever been unfortunate enough to smell a wet dog? Well, this house reeked of it. What the heck was going on? Upon further inspection, the rest of the house was pretty much the same, and I decided to explore the upstairs. Still as I remembered it, it was like deja vu with a hint of nightmare and a sprinkle of dread. The house itself gave me a horrible gut-wrenching feeling. Upstairs was no different from downstairs either. The dirty ceiling, ripped and filthy carpet. The downstairs was a wooden floor, the upstairs was carpet, and there were holes on the wall. Out of the blue, a rat jumped out from one of them, made me jump out of my skin. I was not expecting that. And that woke me up a little bit more and made me alert. And that's when I noticed that room. There can be no description for what I was about to encounter. It was far worse than my worst expectations. At first I noticed a glowing light, and then I noticed it was an LED screen. I walked over ever so slowly. The curtains were closed and the room was dark apart from that screen. Approaching, I noticed more items. A chair, a desk, a filing cabinet. This must have been the room the old man was talking about. Standing right at the door, I noticed the top of a head. Somebody was sitting on it. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Stephen, I whimpered. I was trembling like an earthquake at this stage. No response. Stephen, I suddenly roared with a distraught flare. Again, nothing. I had no choice. I closed my eyes and reached out in front of me, grabbed it and swung it around slowly, every second feeling like a minute of mental torture. I couldn't bring myself to see what had happened, but I had to. I couldn't just run away from it all. That's what Stephen always told me. Stand up to your fears. Well, I was afraid right now. Absolutely terrified, confused, alone. Part of me wanted to run, but I couldn't. I opened my eyes. Pale white eyes instantly stared back at me. I groaned loudly to the shocking scene that I was witnessing. Giant rotting wounds with maggots crawling in and out were on his throat and head. Only looking at them, I could feel them crawling all over me. A rusty old pistol was still frozen in one of his dangling hands. The small frown on his face just killed me. I collapsed to the floor instantly and buried my face within my palms. Sobbing frantically, I was in another world. I began to doubt reality. This couldn't be real. I was imagining things. But my imagination is not this powerful. This is too insidious to be one of my nightmares. I slowly began to stand back up. I didn't even look at him. I just couldn't. I just tiptoed past him. Every muscle in the upper half of my body was completely stuck. And then out of nowhere, I grabbed the chair and I ran with it, rolling it along the hallway and violently thrashed it down the stairs. Screw you, Steven. You didn't have to do this. Why the heck did you do this, you son of a... You destroyed so many memories of mine. I paused for a second. My own outburst had frightened me. Staring at the laid-out body at the end of the stairs with an office chair on it, I walked quickly into the room to examine it. I had to know what was going on whether I liked it or not. I studied the LED screen. CCTV footage. I stepped forward for a closer look and what I saw was too much to handle. A plain room with no objects in it whatsoever. A plain white room apart from a giant blood stain on a section of the wall and pools of blood in places. 3 bodies laid there motionless. 2 children side by side and a woman's body near the wall underneath the blood. Shaking, I slowly stepped back. Vomit. Out of nowhere, I just vomited out of pure disgust and shock. What was going on? I just kept asking myself that. How could there be 4 dead people in a house without somebody noticing? I took another look around the room. The desk was covered in old pens and papers. Scrawled out notes, dirty mugs with coffee rings in them and on them. I opened the curtains for a better view of the room. A framed picture of Freud lay on the far wall. Everything here was dusty, cobwebs on the corner of the window. A cabinet stood beside the desk. The top cabinet labeled Experiment Starving Dogs was highlighted. The other 2 were labeled Notes and Accessories. The top drawer was locked. No way I was going to force this one open, especially after everything I had just been through. I looked around the desk and its drawers for a key. I looked for about 2 minutes. Top left drawer, bingo, a small silver key. A clicking and rolling sound meant that I was greeted with a few tapes in a folder. The folder was labeled Starving Dogs and the tapes were labeled Day 1, Day 9, Day 42, Day 104, Day 235, and finally Day 401. After I grabbed all the tapes in the folder and ran out of there, again I had just leaped over his body and I ran for the door to the garage. As I was running, I suddenly stalled. There was one last room on the bottom floor that I hadn't explored. My feeling of dread overwhelmed my body once. A steel door with a code connected the white room to what I presumed was the dining room. Of course, I couldn't explore it, but what worried me a lot was that I was curious to see it up front. I had a morbid sense of curiosity right now. I didn't like what this whole situation was doing to me. The realization of this made me run. I squeezed through the gap of the door frame in the garage and door and ran for my car. The weather was now cloudy and dull. It looked like it was going to snow soon. The man acknowledged me as I ran out from the driveway, but he wasn't exactly a priority right now. I stacked the folder and tapes in the front seat and drove as fast as I could. I went to my mother and father's house. There was no way that I was sleeping at home. Not after I had been through. The next few days were tough. I explained to my parents everything that had happened and they were really good about it. Mom cuddled me and gave me support and did everything she could to support me. My dad as well. They have always been good parents. I could have sat around for days doing nothing, but I knew I had responsibilities to take care of. I waved goodbye to my mom and dad and hit the road back home. I knew that Alex, Paul, and Rita would be back by now. It had been days since the nightmare that I had encountered. I had called in sick to work for the whole week. Paul had a VHS player that I could borrow, and conveniently enough he had one in the apartment. He was all into his retro movies, a lot of which his dad had passed on to him. He frequently watched them here with us, but we never really got into them. He always persuaded us that they were brilliant. God loves a trier, I guess. That night, I decided to face up to it and play the tapes. I had wondered why Stephen kept these particular ones. These ones must have contained important data for his studies. Beforehand, I flipped through the folder. Eventually, I read it all in about an hour and a half. There was a lot of detail to cover, but these were the basics. I couldn't believe how much Stephen had changed. I knew that he always loved his psychology, but I was not prepared for what was in store now. There have been a lot of messed up psychology experiments in the past. I should know, he used to tell me about them all the time. Basically, the starving dogs experiment was his. He locked his family up for what was planned to be 3 years. The woman in the room was his wife Emily, and the 2 children were his. 1 boy and 1 girl named Sandra and Michael, ages 5 and 3 at the start of the experiment. This was the first that I knew of the children. He didn't tell me that he was going to do it, which apparently was the whole fun of it. How would humans react to a sudden change in lifestyle from luxury to basic survival? For every day of the experiment, he fed them bread and water. That's it. They had no entertainment at all. No items, not even a toilet. A plain white room, bread and water. That's it. He did this for what was about 2.5 years before he had killed himself. Sicko. I couldn't believe the monster my former best friend had turned into. It was unbelievable. But this was only the beginning though. The tapes were far worse. Day 1 consisted of children that were scared. No idea what was happening, huddled up to Emily for support. The mother was screaming and screaming. Curse words, inaudible words at times. Her volatile reaction was scaring me a lot. It's only natural, I guess. This continued on for a while until the tape cut out. Static contrasted against the dark room that I was standing in. I followed up with Day 9. This time, Emily was begging for her release, crying out to be freed, on her knees and absolutely desperate, but the children seemed somehow unaffected. The 5-year-old child Sandra sat solemnly in the corner, with a sad look on her face. Michael seemed unaffected, however. He crawled around like a normal child, looked at the camera with a puzzled look on his face often. I'm guessing too young to realize what malicious act was unfolding. Things started to get disturbing at day 42. Emily was sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth, hair all in a mess and clothes torn up, mumbling absolute gibberish, half of which I could not make out. She sung Happy Birthday over and over for a while and then talked about a dog named Blanket, who she claimed was right in front of her. After that, she had quieted down and started rubbing thin air repeatedly. The children, on the other hand, were fighting rough, kicking, screaming, biting each other. They had an almost evil look in their eyes, and that was it. For the whole tape, they just kicked the crap out of each other. They were beginning to lose it. Day 104 was played after the previous clip had ended. In the clip, Emily kept shouting about worshipping the hollowed-eyed man, and kept screaming at the children. The feces was scattered all over the floor, disgusting. She often cursed at them, spat at them, and threatened them. Often these threats were extremely violent and involved disembowelment, sacrifices, and for one threat, she told Michael that she would rip the skin off his face and wear it as a mask. The children reacted to these by hissing and growling at her, thumping on her leg with clenched fists. The children often ran into walls only to get back up and do it repeatedly. These clips just got worse and worse, however. Day 235 was played next. This one started out again as Emily rocking back and forth like in day 42, mumbling gibberish. Her condition was really withering, as were the children's. The children were just lying there too. Not fighting, not interacting at all, just lying there. Suddenly, Emily stopped and stood up, and this caught my attention. She stood there for about 2 minutes before slowly walking towards the children. Viciously, she picked Michael by the legs and threw him full force against the wall. Sandra got up instantly and ran, but of course the inevitable happened, and Emily did the exact same thing to her. The same wall, both children just lay there. I stood up in shock. This act had come out of nowhere. I found myself whispering, "No, no, no," to the television. She slowly approached one of the children, kneeled down, and started biting him. I vomited once more. A mother eating her own would be enough for anyone. I recalled the footage back in the house. Both children lay there with chunks taken out all over them. I turned it off almost straight after that thought. I couldn't bear it anymore. One last tape I had to watch. I had to know what happened. It took me a while to put it in as I kept stalling, but I found the strength to continue watching. The tape began with Emily just staring at one of the walls. She was scraping something in with her nails. I took a closer look. She was writing absolute gibberish again, apart from the odd random word like mouse, boy, and buzzing. I couldn't make out any of the rest, but the walls were just covered in writing, letters and numbers. You could barely make them out, but you could see them. She suddenly stopped. She got up and stared at the camera for what was a nerve-wracking 3 or 4 minutes. Her dark, sleep-deprived eyes, dark purple bags hung underneath them. A pale white face with strings of greasy, unkempt hair streaking across her cheeks. A ghastly image of a once beautiful woman. She still gives me nightmares to this day. My eyes were fixed to the screen. She uttered quietly, "I hope you do the same as me." She started walking backwards, staring at the camera with those wide, dark eyes as she did so. This went on for a minute, but it felt like a lifetime, an eternity. She turned and faced the wall, looking directly at the red splatter of where she had thrown her 2 children. And then it started. She banged her head as hard as she could, while repeatedly shouting, "It's not natural for a human to self-harm," over and over and over again, banging and banging and banging again and again and again, each hit harder and faster than the last. "It's not natural," getting louder at each whack. It got to a point where it was just constant screaming and banging. I slowly got up and walked backwards while staring at the television. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't take my eyes off of this. It got to a point when there was a pool of blood surrounding her dizzy body. It was slowing her down, each whack getting weaker and her speech becoming mumbled. Eventually, she collapsed to the floor with the pool expanding from her head. A haunting silence. My breathing was heavier than a boulder. The white silent screen was just there. Too much morbidity in a scene had overwhelmed me. I shut my eyes. The sound of a gunshot ringing inside my own head. Stephen's bloodied body flashing as a night terror in my eyes. My own imagination now torturing me. I instantly collapsed to the floor and sobbed into my palms. Alexandria heard me and came to my support. It took me an hour to calm down. What had caused him to do this? Why did he do this? So many questions that will go unanswered for me. There could have been other experiments, but he had to go with this. I couldn't deal with this now. I needed rest. I haven't slept well the previous week, and this wasn't doing me any good. I could sit around and ponder all I want, but for now, I needed to sleep. That night, I had a nightmare. I was sitting in an office chair surrounded by total darkness. All I could hear were the painful cries and screams of a grown woman. A pistol lay in my left hand. I pulled it up to my throat and I gripped it tightly. Without question, I pulled the trigger. In my dream, I stared at total darkness for minutes. I woke up in a cold sweat, dehydrated. I looked around. Back to reality. I was completely paralyzed by fear. I could still feel the maggots crawling all over me. The following diary entry was recovered from an abandoned house after forensics were sent in to collect evidence for an investigation. Sunday. If there's one thing that I have grown to greatly appreciate over the last few months, it's my wife's irrational thought that all psychologists keep their work life absolutely alienated away from their private life. Emily never was one to question my motives and methods, and when it came to matters that I felt uncomfortable about her snooping around in, keeping her distance from unknown territory was a coded command that you could always rely on her to be obedient about. Much to my pleasure rather than hers. Regarding this, I could tell that Emily's unanswered, curious mind had always wondered what occurred within the small block of these 4 office walls. After all, I can't really blame her. Every speckle of dust, every faded and recent coffee ring, every slam of the cabinet drawers, and every rattle of organizing stacks of paper into a neat, non-overflowing bundle against the desk had its own story, didn't it? After all, you can't really pin this on the cat. He was only responding to his natural territorial instinct. Probably the last thing I felt when I got the call this morning was surprise. I can still clearly visualize the anxiety elapsing Mr. Krakowski's face the moment he received the call from the doctor's office nearly 4 years ago, and the only thing that honestly surprised me was how he hadn't bitten the dust any time sooner. I would sooner pop myself than to know that I would have to live 4 malcontent years with the diagnostics of lung cancer. On the contrary, though, strong-willed Chucky eased through the enfeebling cancer whirlwind and simply continued to go about his everyday responsibilities with an odd kind of masked effortlessness, despite the fact that it shredded him from the inside out like the arduous, bone-shattering burden that he tried to resiliently disguise. He was an excellent employer and a level-headed boss. Well, by our terms, he was anyway. Had this expected death come 1 week earlier, it would have crafted the perfect alibi for me. I genuinely hope that Emily and the kids enjoy Florence for the few days, and I only regret that I can't warn them to not take the Italian experience for granted without arousing suspicion for my already bugging wife. There are still plenty of flights that you can book now. We have the money to pay for another seat. The kids and I both want you here. These were among some of these several nags that were aimed at me during the first weeks, and as much as I would love to be with my family, the Fisi have instructed and honored me to carry out their latest ideology in what is expected to be their most controversial yet groundbreaking experiment to date. Isolation, survival, poverty, imprisonment, dehumanization. They all link into what is expected to flourish into this ruthless, starving dogs experiment. Despondency will be key. Monday. What would the Homo sapiens species be like today if the virtue of humanity have never existed or developed, if at all, later than expected? This invigorating thought has frequently labeled my mind since I was about 16 years of age, and it was all that I could precisely be concerned about as I smiled, waved, and gave false words of reassurance to my credulous family as they exited the house for their flight in final time at 5 o'clock this morning. I thought about how this holiday has no meaning to human survival, no benefit to our nature, and simply serves to satisfy the recreational need of the human mind developed by humanity. When you put a lot of thought into it within a short space of time, it's actually scary to think of the amount of services that humanity partakes in. Not just these days, but in the past also, for the sake of the virtue itself. A prime example of this, I believe, is religion. I have always seen religion as a value that is never entirely accomplished or satisfied. It seems to me that no beliefs can have too many members or even too many missions to serve, of whoever or whatever their followers are serving. or even those who guide their followers for either good intentions or power over people, whatever the reason. The result, either you grow into the world's largest religion of over 2 billion, both active and inactive members, or all of your members are either killed or arrested at harrowing scenes in Waco, Texas. The people who strictly follow these organized faiths are really only doing so for one reason: self-fulfillment. To one day go to heaven, to be reincarnated, etc. The more I think about it, I can truthfully say that I cannot think of any other logical benefit of their systems other than to fulfill one's humanity virtue. Going to church every Sunday for an hour, fasting during the day for, 2 weeks, a month maybe. I can't remember the exact guidelines of Ramadan. It's irrelevant anyway because commitments vary in extremity, but I believe the principle behind it is all still relatively akin. I'm keeping this diary specifically separate from the rest of my entries for very good reason. I keep this diary to express my thoughts and judgments during a vital week of my life when my humanity will be the most strained beyond its usual limits. And for some reason, all I can think about is if the contractor is dropping by tomorrow. Maybe it's Wednesday. I'll have to call about that later. Maybe it plagues my head because I'm just too fond of the sitting room that I have right now. The mantelpiece, the blue leather sofa and its 2 stocky armchair companions, the looming glass cabinet of fancy knickknacks, family heirlooms, and personal memorabilia. Memories. For whatever time I step in there for the next, whatever amount of hours until the contractor comes, whooshing images of baby steps, scraped knees and tears, romantic movies with wine chocolates and flickering television lights in a dark room, and rainy days with unfinished Monopoly games are going to flash by me, and all I can't help but do is half-willingly accept it. New memories, old memories replaced with the former of results, discoveries, and observations. Day and night surveillance from my office as they hopefully slowly settle into their new habitat. At first, humanity will take full throttle and there will be confusion, angst, and suffering. That will wither and die as nature should rear its monstrously ugly, yet beautifully ambitious head, and create the scenarios that I will be scribbling notes on and reporting back to Fishi. I wonder when that contractor's coming. We both have a lot of work to do. Tuesday. Make a wish is what my mother would say to me when I was just a 6-year-old boy gathering fluffy dandelions and attempting to blow all the seeds off them in one striking go. 24 years on and looking back at those seeds, forcefully fleeing in the opposite direction of their home, all I'm reminded of is somebody holding a 12-gauge shotgun to their mouth and blowing their brains out, their head dissolving into little mushy pink and red pieces, not flying but drifting quickly towards the wall and ceiling. I'm not paranoid enough to own a gun at the moment, but maybe as time goes by, paranoia will seemingly convert into jittery common sense, and I'll submit to a hesitant deceivement. The contractor came today and removed everything. It was noisy at times, but it was nice to have some background music because I was starting to become uncomfortable with my new solitude, like an unwanted hive that you just can't scratch enough. The pieces of the now plural organ would make a wonderful artistic design for the horrible, eerie empty room. Their revolting presence would go hand in hand, and at least then there would be some sort of scenery to accompany your misery. The brain splatter design and a suicide both share the same value right now. Solution. The steel doors are going to be installed tomorrow and then the walls are going to be painted a blank white. The old man next door gave me a concerned look when I saw him today. He adjusted a nice little smile on his face while he was watering his plants in that flowery hat, but he had an engraved look of apprehension beneath his cracked and rosy red cheeks. Maybe he can read me, or maybe it's the less than average sleep that I've been getting lately, becoming evident through my weary self. Maybe I should get acting lessons from the lovable old man next door. The Stanford prison experiment is something that I have been fascinated by for a very long time. At its very basic core, 24 male students taken under guard and misshaped by psychological torture. It went horribly wrong, of course, and even after just 6 days, the officers involved wanted more. They had power, they had control. They were the ones given the rights to take rough protocol that they had deemed necessary by Mr. Zimbardo himself. My upcoming experiment is too similar to that of the 1971 prison experiment. There may only be one difference, but because I report my findings to a secret organization who keep their dark secrets locked in secured filing cabinets, rather than the US Navy or Marine Corps, it's pretty significant. I am the lead professor behind all of this, and I am open to the exceptionally likely possibility that I will be mutilated into one of those power-hungry prison guard examples, just like a sunset that drains the color out of buildings and trees in a distant horizon. Locked in a room, huddled, scared, basic rations and no means of recreation, meaning or goal to feed their draining and starving civilization. Emily will be worst affected, no doubt. Michael and Sandra, on the other hand, I'm not so sure. They might be too young to realize the confusion that society places on such an act. They'll be like male rabbits in a hut, there from birth, feeding through a drip. I dictate the period in which I wish to observe them. I am their owner. They were family to me once, but now all they are to me are white mice on running wheels and a large black railed cage on blue plastic. Wednesday. There are recent rotting rodent remains in the raw room downstairs, and I am rereading that last line of my previous entry. I paid over 10 grand for all the new installations and I hate it. They are horribly calm and overwhelming, dazingly quiet and eerily too peaceful. Perfect. It's everything I require for my work to go ahead. I have given myself the all clear. Unfortunately, as soon as I had saw that I had diminished a section of my house to absolutely nothing, I panicked and ran back upstairs, little beads of sweat trickling down from my forehead, while I swallowed the quickly reoccurring lump haunting my throat. I have no idea why, but I just couldn't stand it. That there was a thing in my house that contained less content than a plastic bag floating in the wind. Other than for that brief moment that I had experienced it. It was horrifying. White with red. It was such a malignant combination. Like when a roofer slips off the top of a 60-degree angle roof and smacks his temple on the sharp corner of the gray concrete wall. Red flows out a large gashing wound and his skin drains to white, quicker than an endangered chameleon. I sat up in my room quivering from the room's presence, and all I could recollect was the image of the exploding bloody dandelion. Imagining the brain matter slowly seeping down the white wall, with pieces, sooner or later, trickled to the floor making a chunky splattering sound. While my mind had generated this thought, in that moment all I could think was how ventilating those squishy sounds and vivacious colors were. Suicide was simply not an option, as much as I'm contemplating it at the moment. Those nuts at Fishi will do God knows what to my family if I don't carry out their orders. That's why I keep rereading that last line of my previous entry. I fear that there are moments when I'm turning into one of them. Those messed up, rusty-brained, discarding slabs of meat and slime that I worked for and told myself that I respected. Ziggy hadn't a chance. He crawled around in my hand so naively, sniffling and curious. At least his death was quick and facile. The panic, the fury overlapping me. I leaned back and slowly threw him harder than a pitcher trying to strike out the batter. Ziggy lay in a heap on the ground, his body frozen and corrupted from the incident. His black beads for eyes staying so still and his little wiry whiskers flickering like the sound of an old projector shortly after the film had concluded. Twitching like sensitive eyes to an unexpected set of siren lights. I put him out of his misery the same way a careless smoker rubs their cigarette butt dry into the ground. Little helpless bone snapped and split under the force of my black boot, and red spurted out both sides like a condensed ketchup packet from a cheap diner. Sandra's beloved hamster Ziggy remained glossy, dead and soaked in red in the room below. The last feelings I want Sandra to think of me are misunderstanding and confusion, not that I'm a monster. Thursday. Depending on whose perspective you were viewing it from, shaving this morning after a sleepless night was either an ill-informed decision or a controversial stroke of luck. I lay in bed all night screaming to the impossible possibility that my sanity is crippled and common sense is shattered into tens of sharp, piercing little pieces. If Krakowski could only see me fall apart like this, he would pick up one of those pieces and slowly steer it into the side of my forehead, like a steady twisting screwdriver. Speaking of injuries anyway, my shaking hand slipped during my shave today, scraping through the delicate skin between my jaw and my throat. Red bloody blobs dotted on my white shirt and white collar. It stung at first and it came as a shock to me as I'm usually cautious going through this regular routine. It was a pretty deep cut, but it was distracting me from the inner anguish that floated freely around inside my head like carousel horses. Those dribbles of blood sliding down my neck while I shut my eyes and allowed my dizzy eyes to drift happily in circles around my head. It was like easing into a batch of morphine, and the release itself was arousing me. At first, I was a little uncomfortable, but if this is what humanity has created for me, then so be it. Even writing about it now, I am gleefully re-establishing the experience and forgetting about all the stuff that I will encounter in a few days. I received 2 expected packages from Fishy in the post today. One box contained Bluetooth-operated CCTV cameras and USB devices for security and monitoring for both outside and the White Room, while the other contained needles and a large, bubbly-like plastic package which contained a chemical that you could tell was hazardous, just on the basis that it was clearer than water and as temperately lukewarm as healthy flesh. The setup was pretty standard, and aside from the odd flicker or a flash of line every few minutes or so, the quality of the cameras had exceeded my expectations. As effective as they are though, video quality has minuscule wealth to me at the moment. The thought that these CCTV footages will be on all day and night for the next few years is honestly so terrifying to me. An age where technology's influence is exceeding too rapidly and nobody seems to care generates huge concerns for me. That machines are one day going to see more than we can and can already observe events at times when we cannot. Maybe staying up the whole night was a good idea. What if Fishy has me wired right now and I just vulnerably allow everything they sent me into my house? What if they're testing me to see if I will comply with their demands and slavishly carry out their dirty work? If my family is going to die, they're not going to die by the hands of Fishy, but I'm still left in a tough situation. If I don't do it, I die, and I don't know what even more horrible act they will carry out on my family. If I do, I survive, but who knows what happens to them if they're going to be locked up there for 3 years. All I can hope is that they will carry on through this ordeal and they will never have to ever see me again. I can live isolated away somewhere where I'm no threat to society, or maybe I can just travel over to the EFC headquarters and blow all their freaking evil heads off. I punched a hole in my wall with tears in my eyes. I told myself only 2 days ago that I would never own a gun. I'm getting stressed again. Dark hail clouds shroud my thoughts and I'm getting stressed out. The bandage patch on my neck is getting itchy and I'm stressing out again. I looked in the mirror at my sleepless face again. The crusty healing wound was speckled with blood like dust and I was getting stressed out. I think I'll take just one more slice at it. And good thing those needles are right on my bedside locker. That felt great. I think I'll do that to my arm now. Too much blood on the floor, but I can't call an ambulance because Maybe I'm paranoid now. Should I get that gun? Sometime I think I will. Regret for everything. Friday. I look terrible. There's a giant scar on my jaw and several little scars on my upper left arm from where I got carried away last night. This is the first entry that I've written during the daytime, and judging from the brightness outside for this time of year, I would say that it's around 3 o'clock. I checked the clock downstairs, 3:21. I literally just woke 20 minutes ago and I feel really dizzy. I passed out after a strenuous period of heavy blood loss. It's a good thing that I had fainted when I did, or else there was the ostensible chance that I would have traveled further south on the great scraping stress train. How would I explain the scars to my wife? I'm not sure. I guess I'll have to make up some irrational excuse for the gaping crack on my jaw and hide the little reminders under a thick jumper. Actually, memory refreshed. I still have to go clean up Ziggy. The blood had dried onto the wall and it took strained elbow grease, which was in limited supply thanks to my little episode last night, to remove it. I then mopped and scrubbed the floor and threw Ziggy into the bin. I thought that I would be more mentally affected by the action that I had carried out on Wednesday, but honestly, I feel like I'm immune to dastardly performances at this stage. It was times like these that I wish I had kept in touch with Tim a lot more. The one person back in my youth days who actually cared for the interests that I ranted on about, who listened and showed interest for the experiments and psychology theories that I had idolized when I was in my early 20s. During my secondary school days, I had stood up for him a lot and really helped him fit into social groups that he never would have had a chance to become comfortable in if it weren't for my guidance and if it weren't for my assistance. Well, now I really needed him. But he's way too busy for his current low-paying health and safety internship, in which he'll rake the financial benefits of greatly in a few years' time. I just can't help but feel that if I still had Tim to talk to in my life right now, that this problem would have been solved a long time ago. But then again, Fisi have never really taken no for an answer that much in the past, especially to someone who has shown as much loyalty as me towards them. Regardless, I want to be able to share this problem with him, but we haven't spoken in over a year and it's too late now. Rather than him just waltzing down here and saying howdy do to me, he would need to plan his journey and set a time when he was free and not working. I would feel like I'm intruding, which is extremely obscure of me to say because he always had the time for me back in the day. I still remember to this day that moment I came up to him in the line for the vending machine and asked him, "Would you be willing to skip to the front of the queue right now if you knew there was only one Mars bar left?" Had I asked that to anyone else, they most likely would have turned around and given a horrendous look. But Tim was different. He had a sort of restrained respect for everyone, despite had they made him feel uncomfortable or uneasy. Respect, patience, and passiveness were his most appreciated virtues and qualities that sometimes got annoying if you were around them for too long, but traits you miss if you hadn't experienced for a long while. Although there was a 99.9% chance of it not happening, I wish that he would just come and rescue me from this ever so daunting nightmare that I'm in the middle of right now, like a whirlpool of black molten hot tar. A few days ago I had talked about how the development of humanity had some crazy, disturbing effects when you think about them for an extended period of time. In this case, however, my mind struggles to think of a disadvantage when it came to the life policies that my good old friend Tim had. He would die before letting anything happen to his family. The family gets back tonight. I wonder how they'll react when they see the steel doors. Saturday. Screaming, lots and lots of screaming. Emily's going to shred her vocal cords if she doesn't give it a rest soon. The walls are soundproof though, so her valiant efforts are going sadly unrewarded. You would think that this hostile reaction would provoke me to let them out, but not really. It's kind of irritating, to be perfectly honest. The children are huddled up for her support. They're frightened out of their wits and Emily is really not helping. I muted the volume on the screen so now it just looks like black and white footage of lost footage from an old abandoned laboratory or something like that. Anyway, this is the last time that I'll be writing in this diary, as the rest of my research will be going into separate books that will be constantly submitted and updated to the Feisty Corporation. The research should contain nothing personal or biased and must be strictly fact-based. Every day is to be recorded on these tapes, and special notes and hypotheses will be kept in a folder labeled The Starving Dogs Experiment. At request, however, one of my fellow colleagues asked me to scribble down one excerpt for her and keep it in a folder as part of my research. They want a very minimal study done on the capture himself, as they deem it unnecessary for some odd reason. They see it as irrelevant. Anyway, I decided to rewrite this one on a separate piece of small paper and store it in the folder. New memories. Old memories replaced with the former of results, discoveries, and observations. Day and night surveillance from my office as they hopefully slowly settle into their new habitat. At first, humanity will take full throttle and there will be confusion, angst, and suffering. But that will wither and die as nature should rear its monstrously ugly yet beautifully ambitious head and create the scenarios that I will be scribbling notes on and reporting back to Feisty. As for this diary, it has a sentimental value to me now. I shall keep it locked up in the cabinet above. One day I may go back over it and read my thoughts on the week leading up to what could be a very important breakthrough experiment of my psychology career. Unorthodox, most definitely. Ambitious, we shall wait and see. Emily is still screaming. The diary was found on the upstairs floor, just beneath the suicide victim. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. Now, I used to be one of those people that would avoid checking my bank account unless I absolutely had to, because every time I opened it, there would be some random charge that I forgot, or a subscription that I swore that I had canceled months ago. Turns out that I was still paying for stuff that I hadn't used in forever. That's why I started using Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. What I like about it is that everything's in one place. You can track your spending, set budgets, and even get alerts for big transactions or up-and-coming bills. It makes it way easier to actually know where your money's going instead of just hoping for the best every month. And if you're trying to save for something specific, Rocket Money users who create a financial goal save over $70 on average within the first 30 days. And let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. That's rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. The following was a blog post by John Goodman, posted on the 17th of August 2011. Included with it was a download link to $1.wave. The file in question has been converted to OGG format so that it may be uploaded. Goodman mentioned in the post that he would be doing extensive research on the mysteries surrounding this file. If he reports anything back, it'll be posted here. After my computer got burnt to a crisp in a lightning storm, I was left with only my old computer. Fortunately, I had everything from my destroyed computer already backed up onto USB drives and CD-ROMs. My old computer was running Windows 98 and desperately needed an OS upgrade. It was time to search online for a new OS install disk that was at an affordable price. Now you might ask, why not just get a new computer? I would have, but because of the crappy economy, I didn't have the money to do so. So my only other option was to upgrade my old one. Anyways, I searched around eBay to see if anybody was selling a copy of Windows XP at an affordable price. There was no way my computer would be able to handle Windows Vista or 7, so I would just have to go with XP. Lo and behold, somebody was selling a full Windows XP clean install disk for only $1.45. Nobody else was bidding on it, so I placed mine. Even after I had placed my bid, nobody else did. So needless to say, I won the disc, with nobody else to challenge me. A few days later, I received the disc in a white envelope. I opened the envelope and pulled out the disc. It seemed just like any other XP bootable disc. I turned on my old computer and I popped it in and installed Windows XP as one normally would. While I waited for it to install, I popped some popcorn, took a dump, and watched some TV, occasionally checking on the progress of the installation and responding to dialog boxes, entering the registration code, etc. Finally, it had finished installing and I could use the computer. The first thing that I did was transfer everything that I had backed up from my destroyed computer to the old computer. CD after CD, USB drive after USB drive, and I finally got everything onto my computer the way that I wanted it. I decided to randomly browse around the computer a little before I turned it off and got ready to go to bed. This random browsing led me to the Windows Media folder, and then I noticed a file in there called $1.wave. I didn't put the file on the computer, so I assumed it was installed along with the other files in the folder. But I realized that I didn't remember any such file ever being included with XP when I had it on my destroyed computer before I had upgraded it to Windows 7. Curious, I double-clicked the file to open it. It was a very peculiar file. All I heard when I opened it was some weird static noise, almost as if it was some extremely distorted song. The file was just 4 solid minutes of this weird sound. It kind of creeped me out. I mean, it was nighttime, with my sleeping dog being my only company. And I find a file on my computer that I never put there, and wasn't part of the original XP installation, and all it is 4 minutes of weird static noise. And furthermore, it's in a systems folder. Thinking that it might be a virus of some sort, I scanned the file, and behold, one Trojan came up. I had no clue where I would have gotten it from. I had barely been on the internet at all since Windows XP was fully installed. Suddenly, I realized that I had seen a file with this same name flash for a split second on the screen as the disk had installed all these system files. I could only come to one conclusion. The disk had been tampered with. I decided to delete the Trojan, delete $1.wave, and do a full system scan with both of my antivirus programs. It was going to take a crapload of time to finish scanning, so I decided to go to bed while I waited. I still felt a bit mad that I had went through all that time to finally get my computer set up and upgraded the way that I wanted it, only to find out that the installed disk had been tampered with. I woke up the next morning, ate my breakfast, I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and went into my computer room. I sat down at my computer and turned on the monitor, which I had turned off last night before I went to bed. I couldn't believe what I saw. My desktop background had been changed to a picture of a dollar bill. There were 2 errors saying that my 2 antiviruses had crashed, along with a bunch of other blank error dialogues that were all titled $1.wave with the single OK button. Every icon on my desktop had been replaced with a shortcut to $1.wave, even the recycle bin. My start button now said $1.wave, and the usual flag icon was replaced with a $sign. When I clicked the start button, or in this case the $1.wave button to bring up the $1.wave menu, every icon there was also replaced with $1.wave. The administrator name was changed to $1.wave, and the account picture was that of a dollar bill. I clicked Don't Send Report to both the errors, saying that Malware Bytes and Microsoft Security Essentials had crashed. I then clicked the OK button on each $1.wave error box. Okay, the screen was cleared of all those windows now. I tried to reopen my antivirus programs, but they gave me a blank error titled $1.wave. I clicked OK on those. I went to the $1.wave menu and clicked shut down, but I just got the familiar clunk error sound. I tried the power button, nothing happened. Finally, I just unplugged the computer and it finally shut off. I plugged it back in and I booted in safe mode and tried opening the antivirus programs there. But when I did, my computer made the weirdest noise ever and abruptly powered off. I tried pressing the power button, but nothing happened. It didn't even wear up. That freaking virus had completely destroyed my only remaining computer, and I hadn't even gotten it from a website or anything. It had come with my operating system. Well, that was that. I had to go get some things at the grocery store, so I left the house along with my dog. I have yet to earn enough money to buy myself a new computer. I do everything computer related on a friend's laptop that he generously lets me borrow when I need to check my email, do something on my bank account, etc. I have also used that same laptop to type up and publish this story to the internet, along with $1.wave, which I've gone through and manually removed the malicious coding from. After a certain cryptic message that I read talking about some last evidence that will have to be destroyed if I share it with anybody, which you will read about in just a moment, I have decided to research as thoroughly as I can about the mysterious $1.wave until I've figured out the sinister mystery that surrounds it. How did I get back $1.wave after my computer was destroyed, you might ask? Well, when I got home, my dog's ears perked up and she began growling menacingly. She followed a scent into the computer room. Everything seemed normal. However, when I looked where my second destroyed computer was, it wasn't there. Everything else was still there, but the computer was gone. I thought of a robbery, but who would want an old computer that doesn't even boot up anymore? I also noticed the tampered with XP install disk that I had gotten off of eBay was missing as well. In its place was a different disk. It was a white CD-ROM with something written on it in a green Sharpie. I picked up the disc and read, "This is the last remaining evidence that I know of. Keep it secret or I'll have to destroy it too." I glanced down at the table that the disc had been sitting on. Where it had been was a single dollar bill. It wasn't crinkled or damaged in any way, unlike most dollar bills. It was in absolutely perfect condition, as if it had just been made. I took the disc and the dollar over to my friend's house, the one that has the laptop that I've been typing these words on. I explained how both of my computers were destroyed, and he agreed to let me borrow it whenever I needed to. So I got on the laptop and put the CD in. On the CD was just one file, $1.wave. On August 26, 2011, John Goodman made another blog post regarding his continuing research of $1.wave. Hey everyone, it's me again. So, you all remember that $1.wave crap that I posted about a week or so ago, right? Well, like I said I would, I did some research on it. Simply searching $1.wave on Google yielded no results. I asked on a message board about the file, but nobody seemed to have even heard about it before. That is, until I got a reply from some guy saying that he knew of the file and he had bad times with it. It went as follows. Oh, don't even remind me. $1.wave, it's amazing how much trouble a 4-minute sound clip of heavily distorted music can cause. Yeah, it was years ago. Some person on Craigslist was selling a computer with Windows XP already installed on it. At the time, Vista was still in beta and 7 didn't even exist yet. I went to our house in Cleveland to pick up the computer. I brought it home and I turned it on. I noticed a WAV file in the Windows Media folder entitled $1.wave. Curious, I opened it up and listened to it. It was nothing special. Perhaps a little creepy, but it didn't interest me. So I closed it and I went to the bathroom. I came back to my computer and I couldn't believe what I saw. Everything was changed to dollars or some crap and a bunch of error messages titled $1.wave. I tried using my antivirus to fix what I instantly took as a virus, but it wouldn't open. I tried turning off the computer, but it wouldn't turn off, no matter what. The only thing that worked was unplugging it. I tried to boot in safe mode and use my antivirus there, but upon trying to open it, my computer made this bizarre noise and shut off, and it refused to turn back on. I don't mean refused to boot into the OS, I mean literally just wouldn't power back on as if it wasn't plugged in. The next day my computer was gone with just a single dollar bill in its place. Yeah, I know it sounds insane and you probably won't believe me unless you had a similar experience with the file yourself. In Cleveland, eBay had told me that the item location was Cleveland. I now had a new mission, track down the person that sold me the install disk. I replied to him saying that I had indeed had a very similar experience and requested that he give me the exact address of the woman that sold him the computer, as I wanted to have a little talk with her. I probably sounded like a stalker, but I didn't really give a crap. I needed to figure this out. Surprisingly, the user actually sent me the address of the woman to me in a private message. Living in Ohio myself, Cleveland wasn't too far away, so me and my dog got into the car and drove off. We arrived at a small yellow house that could only be the home of a woman who sold me the install disk. We walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. A woman almost instantly answered the door. She seemed to be an elderly woman, short and stout with white hair tied up in a bun. And then I looked into her eyes. Oh, those eyes, they seeped through me and into my soul, hungrily examining it, seeing if it was suitable to feast upon. I almost sprinted back to my car and drove off right then and there, but I couldn't. I had a mystery to solve. "Why, hello, John Goodman," said the woman, in a menacing voice that sent shivers down my spine. My first thought, oh dear, she knows my name. Oh God, please help me. My dog growled threateningly at the woman. It took all of my courage to finally sput her out. Okay, look, I don't have time for fooling around. What is $1.wave and why did you put it on my Windows XP install disk? Oh, I can't tell you that, cackled the woman whom I was now certain was no good. Why not? I countered angrily. Because, said the evil woman. However, I can tell you this. Be wary in the days that follow, for $1 will haunt until all is hollow. And before I could say another word, the woman shut the door on me, cackling wickedly. I had no other choice but to walk back to the car. Along the way, a man came by and asked me, "What were you doing over there?" "I was talking to the woman that lives in that house over there," I replied. The man's expression became concerned. Nobody has lived in that house for over 10 years. I looked to the house, but instead of the bright, yellow, cheery house that I had seen when I had arrived there was a crumbling, abandoned foundation with a wooden plank nailed to the front door saying, "Condemned," in green letters. But I was just talking to an elderly woman that lived there a minute ago," I argued. All the color drained from the man's face. "Elderly woman?" "Yes," I said. "You know, with her hair all tied up in a bun and whatnot." The last person who lived there was an elderly woman, always having her hair tied up in a bun. But she's dead. So I didn't actually find out much of anything new about $1.wave, but apparently it was created by a ghost. Interesting, but it's no laughing matter. I realized that the moment I saw that dang woman out of the corner of my eye, giving me that freaking soul-devouring stare and smiling like a maniac. When I focused on her, though, she disappeared. I then proceeded to sprint out of the room and hide under a blanket for the rest of the night. When I dared go back into the living room, a dollar bill lay on the floor where the woman had been. On August 29th, Goodman updated the blog again with yet another report about his research on the ominous $1.wave. Yeah, it's official, that old hag is stalking me. Since my last post, I've been catching glimpses of her out of the corner of my eye, always with that soul-devouring stare and demented smile. She always vanishes as soon as I focus on her, and it always has to be at night when it happens. Each time I get the heck out of there and hide under a blanket for the rest of the night. When I dare enter the room again, there's a dollar bill where the woman was. I've actually collected all the dollar bills that she's left for me, beginning with the one that came with the last evidence disc into one wallet. I've gone 3 days straight without sleep because of this crap. In the most recent incident, she was even holding a bloody knife. Well, that was enough encouragement for me. I packed up a few things and me and my dog piled into the car and went to my friend's house. Unrelated, I haven't told you my dog's name yet, have I? Well, their name is Coco, as in chocolate cocoa. Anyways, as I was saying, I told him everything that had happened. I had kept it secret because I figured if I told him he would think that I was insane. But at this point, I really had no other option. About $1.wave, the old hag that seems to want to kill me for some reason, etc. I expected him to say that I was crazy and call a mental institution, but miraculously he believed me. I guess he knew that I wouldn't make crap like this up. So I'm going to be staying at his place until this situation blows by. Posted August 30th, 2011. Tonight my friend glanced out the window and all the color had drained from his face, and Coco growled menacingly at it. I looked out the window and I saw it. That blasted old hag. She stared into the room from outside with that soul-devouring stare and that same demented smile. And then she disappeared. We didn't need any more encouragement. We pulled down those blinds and nailed boards to every window in the house, as well as the front and back doors. I don't think we'll be going outside for a while. Posted August 31st, 2011. I went on my friend's laptop and checked the forum thread that I had posted asking about $1.wave. Someone had replied there under the username $1, and take a guess what their profile picture was. That cursed old hag's face, with her trademark staring grin. Her reply simply said, "Oh, more evidence. Guess I'll have to destroy it." I clicked the reply button to respond, but it said that the thread never existed. Furthermore, when I searched the username $1, it said that no user ever existed. Weirdest of all, her join date had been back in 1928. Yeah, 9 freaking decades ago. The internet didn't even exist back then. Posted September 1st, 2011. While on my friend's laptop, a dialog box had suddenly appeared, prompting me to download $1.exe. Knowing this could only be more of the old hag's haunting, I canceled the download. But guess what? It downloaded anyway. Ain't that just nifty? As soon as it finished downloading, it opened itself up. I prepared for the worst. Another computer-destroying virus. The old hag had contained within a computer file. It opened and it was a game. A game of all the wretched things that $1.exe could have been. It was some PC game. It showed a generic menu screen with the buttons play, exit, and options. The background was a picture of a dollar bill. I clicked options, just some graphic settings and such. I went back and clicked play again, preparing myself for the worst. It gave an instruction screen on how to play. Basically, the concept was that you were a bank robber and in each level, you had to go through obstacles to get to the bank and rob it. In each bank, you would have to fight a boss, and if you beat the boss, you would get the money. So I played the game with my friend and Coco watching me anxiously. Unrelated again, my friend's name is Bill. It was your generic platform game, and I played through it quite easily. I beat 3 levels, and then the 4th one was the final one before I got to the bank. I beat that level and fought the boss. The boss was some kind of banker with superpowers or something. It was a World 1 boss, so he was ridiculously easy to beat. I beat him by shooting him in the head with a pistol, and I got the money. The game counted up my scores and so forth before taking me to the first level of World 2. I figured that I had played enough, so I tried to exit the window. But clicking the X only greeted me with the Windows error sound. It wanted me to keep playing, and judging by all the weird crap that had happened to me recently, the reasons couldn't be good. So I tried ending the application process with the task manager, but the end process button only gave me the error sound again. I tried shutting down, but the shutdown button gave me the same sound. It was very similar to when $1.wave had first destroyed my old computer. Because the laptop was running on a battery, I had to take the battery to shut it off. I put the battery back in, rebooted, and everything was normal again. I deleted $1.exe. It didn't come back like $1.wave did. It stayed deleted. Posted September 4th, 2011. More corner of my eye sightings of the old hag. In all of them, she's holding a bloody knife. Boarding up our windows and doors didn't seem to help. She still got into the house. Today we unboarded the front door to go get the Sunday paper. I mean, even if we're hiding from a sadistic ghost woman who wants to kill us, we still gotta keep up on the news, right? It said that a banker had been found dead at a local bank with a bullet wound in his forehead. It showed a picture of the man, and to our horror, he looked exactly like the World One boss from $1.exe. The way in which I had defeated him had even been a pistol to the head, and the paper said that there was a bullet wound on his head. As I read the paper, I saw the old hag again out of the corner of my eye, holding a dead corpse under her arm that looked just like the banker. This time, I didn't focus on her. I focused on the paper to see what would happen if I didn't make her disappear. If she tried to kill me or anything, I would just look at her. She just kept standing there with that demented smile on her face. After a few moments, her smile began to fade and turn into a frown, as if she was disappointed that I didn't seem to notice her. I looked to Bill, and surprisingly, he had followed suit. Even Coco was pretending not to notice the hag. I turned back to the paper so that I could continue seeing the hag out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't easy trying not to see something yet see it at the same time. I kept wanting to look, but I knew that if I focused on her, she would disappear. I wanted to know what would happen if that didn't happen. Her disappointed expression then turned to a fierce and angry look. She raised her knife and lunged at me. In unison, me, Bill, and Coco all whirled around to face the ghost. She stopped abruptly just as she was about to reach us and then vanished. This raised yet another question. If she wants to kill us so badly, why didn't she just do it and get it over with, instead of taunting us like this? Maybe she doesn't want to kill us. Maybe she just wants to make us think she wants to kill us, make us paranoid to the point of insanity, just for her own pleasure and amusement. Sure wouldn't surprise me. Posted September 5th, 2011. I woke up this morning from the little sleep that I actually got. I opened my eyes expecting to see the ceiling above me, but then I froze. Standing above me, looking down into my eyes with her soul-devouring stare and insane smile was the hag. For several moments there was silence. I said nothing, for I was too afraid. I didn't move, I didn't even breathe. My heart had threatened to burst, it was pounding so hard. And then finally the hag broke the silence. "Good morning, John," she said. It took all of my courage to respond. "Just tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. Just leave me alone," I replied. "Oh, it's just so sad when you have to live under a curse. The curse of my own creation. Forced to pass on the curse to others. The curse of $1, of greed. I never asked for this, but after having it shoved down my throat so much, I've come to enjoy it. I'm not sure if it's my sanity that's been punished by this or what, but it comforts me to know that others are feeling the same pain as me." "Enough of your cryptic crap," I yelled, and then suddenly Coco jumped out of nowhere and tackled the hag to the ground, growling furiously. The hag simply smiled. "Go ahead, do it. Rip me to shreds. It might just be the only hope of destroying this curse once and for all. Your suffering will be gone, and everybody who's ever fallen victim to greed's villainy." Before another word could be said, Coco began tearing that woman to shreds. I never knew my dog could be so violent, but I didn't care. If it meant the end of this that loomed over us, then it was worth it. Me and Bill, who had been woken up by all the commotion, could only watch as the hag was torn apart. She didn't even scream. In fact, she smiled as if saying, "Thank God it's finally over." And then it was done. Her body was mangled and ripped so badly that you couldn't recognize her. Red was splattered everywhere. And then the body, or the pieces of it anyway, began to shimmer and fade away. And then they were gone. No trace of them remained, as if nothing had happened. And then we noticed a note laying on the floor where the hag had been. Bill picked it up and read it aloud. "Destroy the dollars, destroy the disc. Do it before the remnants of the curse that lie within them enslave you as it enslaved me." I instantly knew what I had to do. I found the wallet that I used to keep all the dollars that the hag had left me, and I lit a match to it. A blood-curdling scream of pain sounded from it and almost made me jump out of my skin. I threw it outside, and it burned until it was nothing but ash and dust. And then I found the disc containing $1 wave. I threw it to the ground and I stomped on it. Another blood-curdling scream, and the disc spontaneously burst into flames. Now that is what I call burning a CD-ROM. It burned until it was nothing but a bunch of melted plastic. I had to use a shovel to scrape it off the ground and chuck it outside. For the rest of the day, nothing else happened. The hag never came back, nothing. I think at long last this nightmare might be over, but I won't make assumptions too quickly. I'll wait a while and see if anything else comes up. If nothing else does, I guess it's safe to assume the haunting of $1 wave is ended. Posted November 12th, 2011. Well, I think I've waited long enough without anything happening that I can safely assume it's all over. Me and Coco have moved back into our own house. Things seem to be returning to normal. And after some thinking, I've come up with a hypothesis as to what all that crap was about. I think the hag was forced by a curse to do those terrible things. The curse was like a virus using her to spread to others. I guess $1 wave and all the associated things are all duplicates of this virus. I can only assume that its proper name is greed, since that's what the hag kept referring to it as. How greed came to be or what its purpose is, I can only wonder, but the hag seemed to hint that it was she who created it, and it was a screw-up that she made that had caused all of this. I guess those dollars, the disc, and the hag were the last remnants of greed, and by destroying them, I had destroyed greed forever. She was so anxious to get her hands on evidence and destroy it, because she wanted to destroy the curse of greed. I don't know whether any of these guesses are even remotely correct, but I don't really care. As long as this nightmare is over, I'm content with not knowing. And I'm pretty darn certain that it's finally over. My name is Henry Goodman. Yes, I'm related to John Goodman, the blogger that had a rather unpleasant experience with a file called $1.wave. I'm his brother. I am the father of 3 kids, and I have a wife whose name is Jenny Goodman. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm here to tell you about a rather disturbing experience that I had involving a used camcorder that I got off of eBay. It's strange, both me and John's problems happened when we bought something off of eBay. Anywho, on with my story. So, me and my family were planning a vacation and we wanted to capture our trip on tape as well as take some photos. Unfortunately, our video camera was broken, so we would have to either get a new one or just take photos instead. So I went on eBay to see if anybody was selling a camcorder. Well, long story short, I found one, I bid on it, and I won. A few days later, I received a small package which had the camcorder in it. I opened it up and took the camcorder out. It was the typical camcorder with the little small screen on it and such. It had some black Sony camcorder tape, so I opened it up and put one inside. To my surprise, however, there was already a tape inside. I assumed it was one that the previous owner forgot to take out. It was a used camcorder. I hoped nothing important was on it, otherwise they'd be pretty upset about losing it. I took the tape out and I looked at it. There was a piece of yellow masking tape stuck in the front, labeled with a black Sharpie. 2006. Just that and nothing else. I decided to play the tape just to see what was on it. So I put the tape back inside the camcorder and I hooked it up to my TV to watch the tape on it. I rewound the tape, but it was already at the beginning. So I did the usual crap to play a tape from a camcorder on the TV. The tape started with 10 seconds of a blank blue screen, and then it cut to somebody filming a school playground on a cloudy day. Kids ran around and played, but whoever was filming seemed to just be interested in one of them. A little girl, probably around 5 years old, with pale skin, brown hair, brown eyes, and wearing a yellow coat. Whoever was filming seemed to be following her and watching her play. Sometimes the person filming would talk to the girl. It was a man's voice. He called the girl Alice, and I assumed the person filming was the girl's father. I assumed it must have been some recording of her last day of school or something. So, if that was a recording of the cameraman's daughter's last day of school, that must have been important to him. I felt bad for him losing something this precious. But I had little time to ponder that because suddenly, a very loud droning buzzing sound burst from the speakers, scaring the living crap out of me. The scenery had changed. It was now nighttime and the school was deserted, except for the girl. All the while, that ear-piercing buzz continued to sound from the speakers as I plugged my ears. The girl was turned away from the camera so I couldn't see her face. She stood there motionless, and then she turned to face the camera, and what I saw, well, I didn't see that one coming. The girl's eyeballs were gone, just dark empty sockets where they should have been. There wasn't blood or anything, the eyeballs were literally just gone. Her mouth was drooling some kind of disgusting green slime and her nose was missing. Not like it was cut off, just not there. Just plain skin where it should have been. Think of Patrick from SpongeBob, yeah, you get the idea. The scene then burst into static. The buzzing noise stopped, but you could hear the sound of knives slicing against flesh and blood-curdling screams. And then the scene returned and the girl was hanging by a swing in a swing set. Several nasty wounds around her body and a knife laying on the ground below her. Her eyeballs were missing and her mouth still dripped that weird slime, and she still had no nose. The tape was silent. No loud buzzing or anything, just silence as the girl dangled around. Heart pounding so hard it threatened to burst, scared out of my mind because of the sudden buzzing sound and, to a lesser degree, the disturbing footage that accompanied it. I sprinted over to the TV and I shut it off. I ejected the tape from the camcorder, shut the camcorder off, and then unhooked it from the TV. I took a hammer and I smashed the tape to tiny pieces. Breathing heavily, still not sure what the heck had just happened, I sat back down on the couch. I just stayed there for a while, staring at the blank TV screen. After I had finally calmed down, Jenny came home from the grocery store. I helped her bring the groceries in. I didn't tell her about the tape because she would think that I was going insane. The dream I had that night was not pleasant. I was in a dark hallway. My throat, it felt like somebody was repeatedly flicking my Adam's apple. That loud buzzing from the tape played nonstop. It wasn't coming from any direction. It was just there in my ears, as if I were wearing headphones and the sound was playing in them. I was scared out of my mind. I wanted desperately to get out and to go home, to be in the comfort of my bed. I tried crying for help, but no matter how hard I tried, no sound would come out. Suddenly, I felt the urge to vomit. Not having a bucket or a toilet nearby, I puked on the floor. But instead of puke, I hurled up a small Sony videotape with masking tape on the front labeled 2006 in black Sharpie. And then the tape morphed into a girl. No, not just any girl. It was the girl in the tape. Her eyeballs were gone and her mouth oozed green slime, and she had no nose. She slowly walked down the hallway, and for some reason I followed. All the while that awful buzzing noise kept playing. She led me down the hallway and I realized where I was. I was in an elementary school. Kids' drawings and other art lined the walls. Posters saying, "Vote Josh for school president" were everywhere. You get the idea. She led me out an open door and into the playground. It was the very same playground from the tape. And a man was there holding a camcorder recording us. But not just any camcorder, it was the very same camcorder that I had gotten off of eBay. He just stood there recording us. The girl led me over to a swing set. She pulled a knife out of her pocket and my body then became frozen in place. I couldn't move my eyes, I couldn't move my head. I was forced to watch in horror as the girl sliced herself up with it, giving herself these same wounds as in the video. And then the buzzing sound stopped, being replaced with the girl's blood-curdling screams of agony. And then she put her neck into one of the swings as if it was a noose. And then the swing pulled up on its own accord, killing the girl. The girl dangled from it, just like in the video. After a few moments, I could move my body again, and I sprinted over to the man holding the camcorder. He just looked at me and smiled. "That's my girl. I'm so proud." I jolted awake. My heart pounded and my forehead was sweaty and I was breathing heavily. Jenny lay next to me, apparently still asleep. I sat there for a while and finally calmed down. I laid back down in bed and I closed my eyes. I couldn't fall back to sleep. My tossing and turning finally woke Jenny up and she got mad and went to sleep on the sofa. She opened the door but then she froze. She just stood there and I could see that her hands were trembling, and I asked her what was the matter. She just pointed a trembling finger out the door. I got out of bed and I looked to where she was pointing, and my blood ran cold. There was a hallway outside the door going out to the living room where the TV was. From down the hall I could see the TV. It was on and on it was the little girl's face, missing eyeballs and all. But then I realized the TV was in the corner of the room and I could not see from where I was. My sleep-deprived brain mistook what I saw as the TV. But it wasn't the TV. It was the window. For crying out loud, what is it with my family and creepy stuff always happening to us? Oh, sorry, let me elaborate. I am Sally Goodman, one of the 3 Goodman siblings. The other 2 are John Goodman and Henry Goodman, my brothers. Lately, freaky things have been happening to us. First, John gets haunted by some insane ghoul hag. And then a freaky mutant girl's face is staring through Henry's living room window. I prayed to God that nothing would happen to the 3rd of the Goodman siblings. But nope. Something just had to happen to me, because I guess the world hates me. Alright, enough of my self-pity. On with my story, I ain't got all day. Well, I had moved into an apartment in Dayton, Ohio. I was unpacking my things and so forth. There was a small storage room by the patio off the apartment, and I opened the door to put some things in there. It seemed to be empty and I walked in. But then I looked down on the floor and I saw that I had almost stepped on a black USB drive. I picked it up and I stuck it in my pocket. I was curious as to why it was left sitting in a storage closet, and also if there was anything on it. I had my laptop with me, so I decided that I would see for myself later on after I had unpacked a few more things. Well, later on in the day after I had done all the unpacking for that day, I got on my laptop and I turned it on. It didn't have an internet connection, but since I still needed to get Comcast to transfer my cable and phone services over to my new home, just in case there were viruses on the drive, I loaded up Windows XP on a virtual machine. I plugged in the USB drive and it did the usual auto-run thing, prompting me with what I wanted to do. I chose to open a folder to view the files. What was in the drive seemed to be files for some kind of game. I ignored those and found the actual game application, which was named knob.exe. I opened up the file and a new window opened up. It was the game. It seemed to be some kind of 16-bit platformer game. You controlled some stick figure thing and guided him through the levels. There was no title screen or anything. It just went right to the first level. The level was some city streets or something, and you had to avoid the traffic to get through the level. The really weird part was every now and then somebody walking along would notice the stick figure, and they would scream bloody murder. The stick figure would then proceed to grab the person and strangle them to death. I got through the first 4 levels, but then I got to the 5th level. Instead of a city street, the stick figure was standing inside a storage room. My heart skipped a beat when I realized where I was. It was a perfect 16-bit replica of the storage room that I had found the USB drive in. Without me even moving him, the character walked over to the door and opened it. He went outside and the scene transitioned to another familiar place, the patio just outside of my apartment. Out of paranoia, I looked out through the glass door leading out to the apartment patio, and to my horror, somebody was there. It was the most disturbing creature that I had ever seen. He was completely naked and hunched over like a gorilla. He was horribly skinny, and so pale it looked like he had never seen the light of day in his life. Black fur grew along his spine. His face, he wore an expression of unspeakable malice and insanity. His mouth was 2 times the size of a normal human's mouth. His teeth were huge, and his evil smile stretched up all the way to his forehead. He had long black hair that dropped down to his shoulders. He had claws longer than his fingers, and they looked sharp enough to cut my head clean off. And then the thing that I dreaded the most happened. He looked up at me with his cold and wicked eyes, and that horrible smile. I glanced back at my laptop screen for a second. The stick figure on the game was looking into the glass window door, just as this terrible creature was doing. I looked back. The creature was beckoning me over to him with his bony and clawed index finger. The character on the game was also beckoning. I didn't want to go with this beast. I couldn't, but I had lost control of my body. I got up and walked straight into the clutches of that monster. I tried to turn away, but my body fought back. I opened the glass window door and stepped out onto the patio. And being close up to this thing was even worse than seeing him from inside my apartment. He held up a map for me to see, and pointed out some directions with his wicked, sharp claw. And then he held up that claw to my throat and he sliced. I woke with a start, sweating and breathing heavily, heart pounding against my ribs like a hammer. It was just a dream. After a while of just sitting there, I calmed back down. It seemed that I had fallen asleep sometime while playing the game. I guess it made sense. I had been having trouble sleeping the past few nights and I was probably tired. I looked at the laptop screen. There was a message saying the game had encountered a problem and needed to close, blah blah blah. I became curious about the directions the creature in my dream had given me. They were real directions to a real place, some pond around the area. I decided just for the heck of it that I would go there tomorrow and check it out. I didn't expect to find anything, since it was only a dream after all, but still. The next day after breakfast, I got in my car and followed the directions to the pond. I got there and Dad got out of my car. I skipped some rocks and such for a few minutes, not having much of a reason to stay. I started to walk back to the car. But then I noticed something on the ground out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and I went over to examine it. It was a wooden trapdoor of some kind. I remembered the nightmare that I had and I became paranoid, but then I realized how silly I was being. It was all a dream. I mean, nothing bad can really be here, right? There was a handle on the trapdoor that I could lift to open it. Cautiously, I grabbed the handle and I pulled up, to reveal darkness below. I would need a flashlight. I thought that I had one in the back of my car, so I went to go check, and sure enough, I found one. I turned it on and I climbed down into the darkness below. The space was empty with nothing but dirt on all sides, but then my flashlight shined on something that made my blood run cold. Something that made me sprint back out the trapdoor, slamming it shut behind me, and back into my car to drive home and smash the USB drive that I had found the day before into tiny pieces and then burn the pieces. The disturbing part is the hissing sound the drive made when I did this, like some terrible snake. It was a figure hunched over like a gorilla, horribly skinny and pale, fur on its spine, drooping black hair, and an insane deformed face. It was the creature from my nightmare and he was looking right into my eyes. The following was taken from a newspaper article. Several sightings of a horribly mutant humanoid figure wandering the streets of Ohio cities have been reported. These supposed witnesses describe it as being a pale figure hunched over like a gorilla, having black fur along its spine, vicious claws, long black hair, and a terribly large mouth, along with an expression of pure malice and insanity. Some witnesses report seeing it strangle people to death, seemingly at random. It would be easy to dismiss these claims as some sick joke, if it weren't for the sudden and mysterious deaths of several people. Every person who died has been identified as being strangled to death. Some comments listed below the blog post. John Goodman says, "Hey Sally, thanks for sending this to me. More of this creepy crap. I've never been superstitious, but I'm seriously starting to think that we're cursed or something. This chain of freak shows that's been going down lately just can't be dumb luck." Henry Goodman says, "Yeah, we seem to be attracting the paranormal like magnets. First you, then me, and now Sally. I don't know what's going on, but I hope it ends soon." Anonymous says, "You hope so, huh?" It was simply there on one humid morning about 6 weeks ago. I walked out of my house, looked right on the way to my car, and there it was, a black square in the middle of the street. I thought it was a strange box or something. Thinking nothing of it, I went off to get lunch. But it was still there when I returned, and this time, the neighborhood kids that usually collectively played in the yard to my house's left were now instead off to the right, circled around the black square. They were talking, laughing, and poking at it with sticks. Something didn't seem right about the scene, so I got out of my car and stood for a moment watching. What was wrong here? It hit me. They weren't poking at it. They were poking into it. One of the local teenagers was sitting on the porch behind me, so I knew the kids were being looked after. If it was some strange prank or something, well, I would hear about it later. I headed back inside and returned to writing that day's story. Around 8 in the evening, someone began knocking on our front door. Two of my roommates were in their rooms with the doors open, but we were all playing an online game together, so we ignored it and hoped the guy in the room downstairs would get it. He either didn't hear it or didn't care, so we sat there listening to the pounding and knocking for about 15 minutes before one of my roommates logged off the game and stormed down to the front door. I heard, "What the heck do you want? None of us are parked in your spot. We never park in your spot." That didn't sound good. I left my computer and I slid down the hallway to see what was going on. They had told me stories about Bill and how he insisted that one section of the sidewalk was for his food truck. Apparently, he would go around at literally any time of the day or night knocking on every single door in the neighborhood until he had found the offender. This time, Bill was looking not for a car owner but for the perpetrator of the black square prank. After much arguing, he finally moved on to the next house, but I couldn't go back to playing our game. Instead, I wandered out under the evening orange and headed down the street. The black square was odd, its angle seemed to be changing to match me, and I moved my head back and forth a few times rapidly to confirm that it always looked exactly square from any angle. Anton was sitting in his open garage in a lawn chair as I approached. He handed a man a bag, pocketed a stack of cash, and coughed and leaned back. The stranger hurried away without looking at me. It was not an unusual sight. Standing in Anton's driveway, which ran straight at the black square in Bill's house beyond, I asked, "Hey, what is this thing?" "No idea, man," he responded. "But it's got me on edge. It's just been there all day. I thought maybe somebody was scoping me out, but it doesn't do nothing." I didn't want to get too close to it, so I picked up a stick. Kids were messing with this earlier, right? Did anything happen? Nah. It was strange. There seemed to be some sort of scaling perspective at work. As I moved closer to the square, it grew larger in my sight than the change in distance it warranted. Far away, the effect had been imperceptible, but up close, it was extremely unsettling. It felt almost as if the black square was looming up to encompass me, and might even leap out at any moment. It was becoming increasingly obvious that this was no prank. The sides were exactly equal in length from what I could see, and absolutely nothing showed or reflected on its surface. I had seen Vanta Black nanofabric in person once before, and that super black material had definitely left an impression on me. It had felt like staring into an absolute void, and I had that same feeling now. The only difference was that my stick encountered no resistance as I moved it forward. I took one step. The stick still moved freely ahead. Was it past the threshold yet? It was disturbingly impossible to tell because the square always seemed to be facing me, so I couldn't tilt left or right and get a look from the side. The square also got bigger faster than it should have with each step, so I couldn't get a good idea of exactly where it began and ended. Worst of all, the forward perspective had no landmarks and no shadows. It felt as if I was inside a television show and reaching forward into a CGI background. The studio lights off screen were still lighting the stick, and I was reaching into something that didn't really exist. I swung my branch left and right. There were no edges to strike either. The pointed end traversed from ultra black to the green of Bill's lawn and back with no resistance. It was then that I truly understood that we were in trouble. "Hey, Anton." "What up?" He was usually one to play it cool, but I could tell by his subtly concerned expression that I must have looked very strange standing in front of complete nothingness. How do I phrase it? Let's make sure nobody goes near this." He nodded and gave a nervous laugh. "We didn't have any sort of housing association or community building, so it would really be up to word of mouth. And Bill was 2 houses past ours now, still knocking on doors, and He was doing a decent accidental job of warning everyone. A few neighbors had come out onto their lawns to stare at the thing, and I saw Idol emerging from one lawn over. While studying the black square from afar, she shivered and pulled her headscarf a little closer. I smoothed down my shirt reflexively as she approached. She stopped on the sidewalk just short of Anton's driveway. "Oh, what's the square?" We just shook our heads. "You call the police?" she had asked, looking at me. Anton leaned back in his seat and watched me. Put on the spot, all I could say was, I don't think so." She was visibly confused. "Why not?" Anton snickered. "The cops don't come here, girl. The police don't come to this area. No, they do, but trust me, you don't want them. They don't come here to help." "Oh." She looked down at the ground and then over to the black square and then to her front door. She departed without a word. The rest of the neighbors began to emerge from their homes as Bill pissed them off in sequence, but we didn't meet or talk beyond the distant glances of confusion and confirmation. I didn't like that strange square in the street, not one bit, but there wasn't much to do about it. A few people were taking pictures, and so I went back inside and put my phone on the charger to do the same. My roommates and I locked the house up tight that night. We couldn't see the black square from any of our windows, but the mere knowledge of its presence was like a chill in the air. I was the night owl out of the four of us, and when the others went to bed, I quietly stacked boxes full of junk from the basement to block the windows, just in case. In the morning, nobody commented in approval of the boxes, but neither did they take them down. I stepped outside to confirm that the anomaly was still there. This time, I took pictures. I had seen more than my share of movies and shows about creepy anomalies, but it was another thing having one actually show up outside of my house. In person, there's a balance of risk versus curiosity, and there was nothing that we could do about the square without endangering ourselves. We couldn't get too close to it, because who knew what would happen, and we certainly couldn't go inside of it. So it sat there, and in large part, we ignored it in our day-to-day lives. But there's also another kind of risk, the unknown, and the stress effects on your community and on your health. Each morning for a week, I would look to my right at that eerie black square and wonder if I was being watched. Or worse, was it some kind of hole from somewhere that might let in horrific entities beyond our understanding? Or heck, even just basic clawed creatures that we could understand would be horrifying. A simple wolf or a bear on the loose on our street would have been an emergency warranting help. And here we were with the possibility of literally anything appearing at any time. On a random night that about 8 people were over to play board games, Idol asked again if I would call somebody, and this time I agreed. But who and how? I did find some numbers for 2 local news channels. I sent in my pictures, but they laughed at me and said that they looked photoshopped. I insisted that no, it was literally just a black square, and they told me to call back when I had something scarier. The military was an obvious answer too, but how does one call the military? I don't exactly have a phone number for the military. Each night for a week, I waited on hold with various desks, bases, and institutions, repeating my story verbatim each time. A strange anomaly has appeared in our neighborhood, and I need somebody to come take a look at it. Most secretaries hung up on me immediately, but I finally got one that laughed. He asked, "Watching some X-Files tonight?" I sighed. "Look, I've been trying to contact someone about this for a week. Let's say hypothetically that I'm serious. Is there some sort of division or group for that?" "No, let me just call Area 51, buddy. They'll take care of you." "Oh, come on. There has to be some guy that takes weird phone calls and checks them out, right?" "Oh, that's no fun." "Fine, I'll give you the number." I had it. Finally, I had it. The next conversation that I had was promising, and a military jeep showed up the next morning. Ido texted me when she saw it park on the street, and I hurriedly went outside to greet one man, apparently. He was only slightly older than me, and he stood staring at the black square with a haunted gaze. As I finally got his attention, he turned his head to look at me and said, "What in the world?" "Yeah, right." I pointed down the street at the black square. "That thing's been sitting there for like a week and a half." Finally prompted to move, he went back to the back of his Jeep, pulled out a tripod and a camera, and set it up facing the anomaly. Watching him, I asked, "So you're going to call in the big guns, right? Somebody will take care of this." His only answer was a glance, and then he got in his Jeep and drove off, leaving the equipment running. Well, that was progress, I told myself. Somebody was aware of the issue now, and somebody was on it. A small consolation as the days wore on. One of the neighbors boarded up their windows, and then everybody did. Nobody asked the first house to do it as if they had seen or heard something crazy. We just did it. That day we went to the hardware store, endured the awkward process of explaining what we were doing to the overly helpful employees, and then we took our boxes of nails and stacks of wood and began hammering into the window frames. I winced at the first one that went awry and damaged the wall, but I figured that our security deposit was long gone anyway. When we kept the curtain between the glass and the wood so that the landlord wouldn't notice on a casual drive-by, although he would certainly see that the entire neighborhood had suddenly acquired bars and boards. If the area went to crap, would he lower our rent? Doubtful. And then my roommates and I got drunk together for the first time in months. The neighbors were doing the same thing in their boarded up houses and on their lawns, and eventually we had a sort of block party going. It was an eerie thing, all being connected and bounded by a common threat, but being unable to mention that threat even as it loomed in the distance at all times. There was nothing that we could do about it, so mentioning it publicly was impolite. As dusk deepened and somebody started a bonfire in their backyard, I almost couldn't stand the pressure of what was happening. That thing might turn deadly and kill us all at any time, but I wasn't even allowed to mention it without pissing people off. Boarding up our houses, we were all reacting to it. We were all aware it existed, and we all knew everyone else knew too, but we couldn't talk about it. A weird defensiveness was emerging among the conversations that I overheard. This was our street, and none of us could afford to move away. Therefore, the black square had to be harmless. There were even people talking about the idea that there was nothing wrong at all, and that talk was growing. Agitated, I left the block party. I still wanted to drink, but angrily now, and so I went to the nearest bar and I sat. By pure chance, to my left was the soldier who had set up the camera equipment. He was half sloshed already, and he looked sidelong at me while holding the bar to keep himself up. He laughed darkly. "Oh, it's you." It was almost a relief to see that he was still in town. "You guys going to do anything about the black square once you collect enough information?" He sat taller and focused his bloodshot eyes on me. "Guys. Yeah, your team or whoever." "It's just me." "Oh, well, what about the higher-ups?" He downed another shot that had just been delivered. "Higher-ups? My whole department got cleaned out by the new administration to cut costs or something. I'm the only guy in my entire building." My beer arrived and I took a sip of it while trying to fully understand what he meant. "Like temporarily? Are you waiting on new hires?" He gave an exaggerated shrug. "It's been 7 months and nobody talks to me or tells me anything. I just get a paycheck automatically, no emails and no nothing. I'm thinking maybe they just forgot to transfer me when they got the rest. I don't think anybody even knows that I'm still there." That was an off-putting thing to hear. Well then, what do we do about the black square? He gave a long, drunk belly laugh. "Brother, there are 47 anomalies in Ohio alone, and I'm the only person in the state left in the department that handles it. Just be happy that yours isn't making people crazy or changing your muscle tissue into acid while you sleep." What? Does that happen? He stared forward at the venue's long-mirrored back wall for a moment, unmoving except for the muscles in his jaw tightening as if he was grinding his teeth. After a tick, he suddenly reached over and clapped me on the back. Nothing so dramatic as all that. I'm just playing. He got up, threw some cash on the bar, and began to stumble away. Wait, I called after him. What's your plan for the black square? Plan? He yelled back on his way out of the door. You're on your own, brother. I skirted through the crowd and pushed out into the night. And what about the 46 other anomalies? But he just kept walking and soon became small in the distance. Was it really possible that there was nobody manning the defenses for things like this? Were we simply open to danger with no one to respond? Was the only working plan to hope that nothing bad would happen? I mean, what the heck kind of plan was that? I returned home even more agitated than before. It was about 3 weeks after the appearance of the anomaly that those that insisted the black square was harmless became the majority. We had been able to complain about it, make jokes, and watch it fearfully before that afternoon. But the winds changed and I immediately found myself on the outside with no warning. If I glanced suspiciously at the black square, somebody would deride me for it. If I tried to measure it to see if it was growing at all, somebody would come out on their lawn and tell me to stop and that I was wasting my time. By the 4th week, those reactions became veiled threats. Bill was standing out on the sidewalk the first day of that 4th week. I had just come home from playing a card game elsewhere and he approached me rather angrily. Stop causing trouble, he said without sugarcoating it. Me? He was a large man in multiple ways and I took a step back warily. I'm just not willing to accept that the incredibly odd anomaly in the middle of our street is safe. The black square isn't causing any trouble, he growled. You're the problem here. Pissing people off and going against the grain. People want to sleep soundly and they can't do that if you fill their heads with nonsense dangers. Well, if it's nonsense, I asked, then why are your windows boarded up? He balled a fist. Because that's how it's always been around here. Everybody does it and always has. What are you talking about? It was just last month that. He slugged me in the stomach. I backed away. There was nothing left to say. I understood exactly what was happening. He glared from the sidewalk until I went inside and closed the door behind me. 2 mornings later, screaming erupted from a few houses down. 9 of us rushed out of our houses with makeshift weapons, only to find that the danger had been the night before. Someone's window had been broken, and the wood beyond had been clawed mightily by something that had left traces of azure ichor behind. I thought that certainly it would be undeniable now. It was obvious that something had come out of that black square and tried to get into a house. The only reason the single father and his 2 girls were alive was because they had boarded up their windows like everyone else. See, I said to those gathered, I told you it's dangerous. But the single father in question shook his head. Oh, of course you would say that. How did you do it? I began backing away almost instantly as all eyes turned on me. What? Bill said. Yeah, likely what happened. What tool did you use to make those marks? And what's that blue stuff? Is it toxic? Did you put Ethan's girls in danger by throwing toxic blue sludge on their house? Ethan added, and you'll pay for that window too. What is wrong with you people? I clutched my bat and continued moving backwards. Idle came out of her house then and asked some of the others in the group what was going on. And they backed off and Bill and Ethan shot me hateful glances. On the way back to my place, Anton shook his head as I crossed his driveway. You're gonna get yourself killed, boy. Whispering, I asked, what? By insisting that the physics-defying anomaly in our street is possibly dangerous. Just saying. I sit in front of this thing all day every day and it freaks me out. But I don't say nothing to anyone else around here. Neighbors are more dangerous than that thing, you get it? Keep your head down." I mulled over his words for another few days while the attitude in the neighborhood became openly hostile. More claw marks and strange azure liquids appeared during each night, and Bill started enforcing what he called his right to open carry by walking around the sidewalks with a rifle slung over his shoulder, and then Ethan started doing it too. It made me tense, but they had often talked about gun responsibility, and part of me was glad to have weapons around, given that something was probably coming out of the Black Square each night and trying to get into our houses. At 4 in the morning on the first night of the 5th week, I heard loud banging on the front door. For 20 minutes, I listened to someone pounding and yelling outside, until one of my roommates shouted from his bed, "Oh, screw off, Bill. We don't have to answer the door for you. We're not parked in your spot." The knocking went silent. My other roommate called from his room. Well, that's the first time he's ever actually gone away. At that, I sat up starkly in my bed. I knew. In that keening instant, I knew. Something had happened out there, some spark. Perhaps the unseen creature had finally gotten someone. Perhaps it had gotten one of the neighborhood children. I grabbed my baseball bat and put on my tennis shoes. Other than that, I was only in shorts and a t-shirt, but there was no time. Running into the dark hallway that connected our rooms, I whispered, "Get your gun out." "What?" my roommate asked. "Get your gun ready," I practically hissed. "They're coming for us." There was a crash of glass and the sound of boards being ripped off in the back of the house to punctuate what I had said, and I heard my roommate jumping up and fumbling around with the case that held his gun. My other roommate just sat quietly and fearfully. "They're not coming for us. They're coming for you." In the dark, I heard his door close and lock. This was no movie situation. I knew this would end very quickly between untrained civilians, and I knew that I was at a big disadvantage. If the windows hadn't been boarded up, I would have escaped that way, but I was forced into a corner. I only had knowledge of the terrain and the advantage of surprise. Using long steps to avoid the parts of the floor that creaked, I moved out into the board game room, and a big silhouette moving around the corner became a wide-open target for my bat. I swung without restraint and as hard as I could. I had never tried to kill anyone before, but I was amazed at how lethal my strength felt when the restraints were off. The bat snapped in half on Bill's head and he fell to the floor. He limply tried to resist, but I pulled at his rifle while screaming obscenities, and he gave it up while groaning on the floor and whimpering about his head. I had won. But unfortunately, there were 7 more silhouettes behind him. Ethan was among them, and I saw his face by moonlight as they dragged me out into the street. "He nearly killed Bill," Ethan shouted. "Proof positive he's the one behind the attacks." "You came into my house with guns," I screamed at them. "You're psychopaths." There were 20 other people out there already, many sticking to their own lawns. By the light of the full moon, they watched fearfully. Some of them asked if what I was saying was true. Ethan yelled over them, "He'll say anything to trick people." They were still holding my arms, but I struggled. "This is ridiculous. You've all got guns and you literally just broke into my house in the middle of the night." "You're a liar," Ethan insisted to the neighbors that we passed as they kept pushing me and dragging me. As we passed Idle on her lawn, I realized where we were going. She ran forward and kicked at Ethan. "I didn't leave my country just for you to be the same." One of the men stayed behind to keep her restrained, and I nearly got away because of the distraction. But unfortunately, they caught me and continued moving me toward the Black Square. Even by moonlight, it was starkly visible. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan snarled. "Oh, you know, you monster. I can't let you live after what you did to my little girl." I could see that one of the wooden barricades among his windows had failed. Something had broken its way inside, and red blood was mixed with the azure pools usually left behind. "So you're going to try to kill me by throwing me inside the Black Square?" I asked loudly so that everybody around could hear. How does that make any sense if you insist that it's not dangerous? That I'm the one who somehow orchestrated these attacks in the night? One of the neighbors screamed, "Stop trying to get out of this." She turned and insisted to somebody else that I was a liar, and getting rid of him will stop the attacks. They were lost, and I had known it, but it was only now that I truly accepted that I was not in a neighborhood surrounded by peers. I had been living in hostile territory surrounded by enemies for weeks, and they had become delusional because of their own fear. Living with fear every single day and being unable to do anything about it had turned their fear to anger, and now anger had become violence directed at the only target that they could actually reach, their neighbor. On that first night of the 5th week, they kicked me forward and pointed their guns at me, forcing me to walk into the black square, the unknown source of their fear. It had come to us from somewhere else, but it was now the desperate void at the center of our lives. It was our heart. I had never felt more sharp and aware. Adrenaline seared fire through my every nerve as I kept moving forward away from the guns at my back. The dark square expanded rapidly in my sight, but then grew more slowly as I came nearer than ever before. It asymptomatically filled half the sphere of what I could see. I kept waiting to pass the threshold like a door to see the sides that I had tried to find with sticks and ropes over the last 5 weeks, but it never came. I kept pressing forward only to find myself still half in the world that I knew and half in the darkness, until I turned around and saw Ethan and the others very far behind me. My brain struggled to process the shape or curve of what was happening, but I had the distinct sensation that I could keep walking forever, and the black square would remain a giant sail pressed against half of me. Except I knew there was an unseen drop-off, and perhaps that was the key. Perhaps the door was actually down, and the black square that we could perceive was merely a higher dimensional perspective on it. I got down on my knees and hands and began to crawl. I couldn't afford to fall accidentally. "Oh, don't bother," Ethan shouted in the distance. "You're going over, you're not getting out of this." There it was. I could feel the edge. Here the black square was almost exactly half of what I could see around me. Directly above, to the left, to the right and down. The paved street, far beyond Bill's and Anton's houses. Part of the street that I had stood upon many times coming the other direction. It now met sheer void. But it wasn't dark. Light had always been coming up from below. There had just been nothing for it to reflect from so that we could see it. Light came up from below now, illuminating my face, my eyes, and my mind. It was a ghastly light, certainly not ever a color that had graced our world before, and I could see everything by the cast of its deep glare. I had never seen that color with the rods and cones in my eyes before, but I knew what it was. If you could open a door into the mind and observe the hues within, if you opened that door into the mind of a person being tortured with perfect and exacting skill, you would see the chroma of pain. Not just the feeling of it or the idea of it in thought, but the blood of the concept, the core, as a brushstroke on existence. For some reason, I laughed, but I did not smile. I stood and began to walk back. Ethan held his gun forward. "Don't you come back here, don't you do it." But I just shook my head. The other men behind him raised their guns too, but they were waiting on him. I didn't slow, I couldn't. As I moved toward Ethan, I told him, "You're human, Ethan, fundamentally capable of good or just neutrality, of cooperation, of peace." The words spilled directly from my raw brain and into the night air. You are not like what's over that edge. Take a look for yourself, you'll understand. The barrel of his weapon glimmered darkly by moonlight, but the square behind me was blacker. "What do you mean?" he asked after a moment, the strain of oncoming terror dampening his tone. I think he saw the look in my eyes. Some small fraction of what I had seen had to still have been lingering in my irises, like a rotting reflection gone bad. "What's in there? What's over the edge?" I couldn't really think at that moment. I put my forehead to the barrel of his rifle and grabbed the trigger under his hands. "Please." He pulled away in fear. "You're crazy." They were no longer a threat now. I drifted past them and back to my house, where one of my roommates peered out of his door and apologized, and the other finally finished finding his ammo. "Danger's past, don't bother," I murmured before going into my room and sitting on my bed. It took 6 days for my brain to develop a coping mechanism. For 6 days, I sat and stared at any blank white wall that I could find. It was eye bleach in a way because it had every color and none. After 6 days, I felt nothing, and that was my release. To scab and scar over what had happened to my mind, my brain had amputated my emotions. And good for that. I would feel horrible at the loss of love and joy and friendship and companionship. But I can't. And that's better than feeling what I witnessed over that edge. Bill was back from the hospital by then and feeling rather sheepish. A neighborhood watch had been set up and armed men were taking turns guarding the black square, around which they had built a wall out of bricks and cement. They knew that nobody would be coming to help. No police, no military, no government. We were on our own, a fact which made Idle sad as she talked to me about the home that she had left, where it had been exactly the same in her village. "This is humans," I told her. "Sometimes we do better for a little while. Sometimes we don't." She didn't have a chance to reply before Bill came up and sat carefully down next to me on my porch. He rubbed his bandaged head and said, "Sorry about what happened last week." I kept watching my armed neighbors around the black square. "It doesn't matter." "It does, though," he muttered, looking downcast. "We could have killed ya." "It doesn't matter," I said again. He swallowed audibly and then asked, "What you see in there? I think the neighborhood will go to crap now." Now? It amazed me that it was right there. It was right there, just 100 feet away. We were alive and standing here, breathing air and eating food and having conversations, just 100 feet away from that. "It was always here, Bill. The only thing that changed 6 weeks ago is that we can see it now." We don't talk much anymore. The neighborhood is quieter than before. We just sit and wait for the inevitable, each day and each night. The black pit is among us, lurking in open sight, and one day it'll spill forth ungodly hordes that I don't need to describe because you already know what they look like. Sometimes we do better. Sometimes we don't. When it happened, I held tightly onto my pillows to keep from spinning off the bed. My rapid ascent out of sleep came with a sense of spiraling motion that continued into waking as the world spun around me. I clung to the walls and stumbled toward my bedroom door. The spinning was not physical but oral. A tremendous brass horn blast whined on a long curving cycle outside, much louder than any siren that I had ever heard. My roommate staggered into the hallway in front of me and we ran for the front door. I shouted, but I could hardly hear my own words over the siren. We burst out onto the porch in our pajamas before we realized that we had no idea what we were doing. What was the bellowing and undulating note even for? It looked to be somewhere around midnight and the night air was weirdly warm, but it wasn't raining. Was it a tornado warning? Across the street, dimly lit silhouettes began to emerge. We yelled and made hand signals, but communication was impossible. While some watched from their stoops, a dozen of us gathered on the pavement to try to hear one another over the din. It was only as those silhouettes came within a few feet that I recognized the faces of my neighbors. The horn's deep vibration faded away, leaving us in a thick blanket of sudden silence. After rubbing his ears for a moment, our neighbor Bill asked, Anybody got their phone with them? That was sensible. I had fallen asleep with my phone in my pocket and I grabbed it once he had made me think of it. The screen faintly illuminated a strange murkiness in the air. I frowned and entered my passcode. I'm not seeing any warnings or anything. I continued to search online until my gaze set upon a simple but profound concern on my screen itself. Guys, it's 9 a.m. Another neighbor, Anton, looked around at our night-cloaked street. You're kidding me. No, I followed his gaze. I had assumed it was the middle of the night, but now that I thought about it, the darkness around us was less than natural. The lights on the houses radiated muddy auras as if they were underwater, and a cloying miasma hung in the air that made it subtly hard to breathe. Something's wrong. There's a special sort of terror that comes upon a group of people who, together and all at once, realize that they are not as safe as they thought they were. We scanned the unnatural gloom, each of us turning until our backs were to one another. Do you hear something that sounds like crickets or cicadas? Don't be ridiculous, it's the middle of winter. One of my roommates pointed. There. A single drop of glimmering azure ichor hung from a nearby tree. Bill screamed the order. Everybody back inside. Our circle broke into a scattering spiral as we each ran for our homes. My roommates and I didn't look back until we were inside our house behind a slammed and locked door. Running to the front window, we pushed the furniture aside and crouched to peer under the curtains. Out there in the oppressive ink, the street was still. Nothing moved, save for the concerned faces in windows opposite. Yet we knew that something was out there. A very tangible sense of something near the waking began to decline, and we waited wordlessly until the unknown enormous presence out in the darkness returned to full slumber. But the darkness itself remained. My roommates and I paced the living room while waiting. Nobody online or on television made any mention of the event, so we soon realized that it was only us. It was just our neighborhood. And things were almost normal here. One of my roommates complained angrily. What did we do to deserve this? 10 o'clock came and went, and then 11 and finally noon. We began to receive texts and calls from our jobs, and we argued about what to do until we were forced to face the fact that life had to go on. No doubt our neighbors were thinking the same, but everybody was staring out of their windows waiting for somebody else to make the first move. Well, we were young, fit, and stupid, so it was up to us. We opened our front door just enough to squeeze through, and then we dashed for our cars. I fumbled with my keys as that sense of a waking presence shot adrenaline through my veins. Whatever it was, it sparked primal terror in me, as if my very genetics held a fearful memory of it. My roommates got their cars turned on and peeled out. I just barely managed to get inside, turn the ignition, and follow them. Ahead, the entire world looked cloaked in darkness, but their cars began to slide strangely as they neared the T-intersection at the end of our street. I only barely managed to avoid them as white glare blinded me and ice appeared under my tires. The world was still there, just as bright and cold and snowy as before. That sickening warmth existed only in the darkness. Looking back, our neighborhood sat perfectly normal behind us. We could even see our neighbors staring at us from inside their homes. From this vantage point, there was snow on the rooftops and on the sidewalks and street that had not been under our feet during our panicked run to our cars. We rolled down our windows and exchanged confused guesses as to what the heck was happening, but the best that we could come up with was, it was another reality bleeding over onto ours. Lacking any idea what to do about it, they proceeded on to work, but I stayed behind a few minutes to test the edge. There was no shift. I was either in the warm darkness or the cold light, never both and never halfway. Stranger still, the two were at slightly different angles, almost the way light gets refracted when looking into an aquarium. I could fix my sight on a distant point, step over, and find myself looking somewhat off my target. I took this video of the transition between modes of existence while I mapped the exact boundaries and found that it was a perfect square containing our street, our houses, and our backyard. And too always without exception, time in the darkness came partnered with that rising sense of fear. Something out there had sensed my presence, but if I kept it short, I could avoid truly waking it. In that manner, I drove up to each house and warned my neighbors one by one. As long as we stayed inside of our houses or our cars, we wouldn't incite further danger, or so we hoped. There was no way to be sure. The rest we simply had to endure. Random claw marks on anything wooden, stinking azure ichor left behind by creatures unknown, and a perpetual feeling of being under siege. Our night-shrouded days became permanently spent indoors. Any outing involved treating our garage like an airlock, and those neighbors without garages bundled up and made terrified sprints to their driveways as quickly as possible, and as rarely as working life would allow. Our once tightly knit community became a series of isolated bunkers, and weeks passed while we emailed each other trying to figure out what to do. I spent nearly 25 days huddled in my room behind boarded and barricaded windows trying to sleep while hungry, growling and curious sniffling passed by intermittently. There was a new ecosystem burgeoning out there, seen only in the glimpses between nail-ridden 2x4s, and we had to stretch wintering plastic over the windows and begin changing the air filter weekly. The deepening murk was clinging taut and otherwise didn't intrude into our homes like a normal gas, but not a single one of us believed it would stay that way forever. We began to reach out. We called anyone that we thought would listen. The hardest part was our lack of external evidence. How do you convey the experience of your daily life with someone that hasn't seen it firsthand? From inside, oh, that's just a picture of a street at night. From outside, oh, that's just a picture of a street during the day. Yes, but the point is the experience of the place. The impossibility of two worlds existing in the same location. What they saw from their perspective conveyed nothing of the torturous isolation and fear that we felt in ours. We sent letters. I began sleeping in the shower since the bathroom was in the center of the house. It had no windows and it felt slightly safer. We emailed. One of my roommates had their window break during the night, and we had to pull him into the hallway, slam the door against some half-seen flailing and shrieking creature, and then seal off that room permanently with nailed boards. We called. Our kitchen table became a communal office for handling all the paperwork that City Hall and the distant government offices gave us. We filled out forms, we submitted information, and we waited with shrinking hope as even more paperwork came back in return. It was a self-perpetuating cycle that we soon realized was designed to deny us. They thought that we were crazy, and rather than directly refusing crazies, they preferred to contain them in a gigantic loop of forms. We showed up in person and waited in numerous lines. Our weekly neighborhood meetings held in different living rooms each time turned into venting sessions for our in-person frustrations. Our neighbor and my close personal friend Idle told us how she had waited for an appointment with the mayor until they turned the lights off in the building, and she realized that he had no intention of seeing her. One of my roommates talked about how he had gotten banned from the DMV for trying to show people video of the border transition from night to day. Another neighbor talked about being turned away a dozen times by random passers-by who thought that she was homeless and asking for money. For the first week since the curse had come upon us, we had no idea what to do next. A complete inability to take action as a way of making a man curl up in the shower and cry. I could feel that hopelessness taking root in me as I tried to sleep, but I wasn't ready to give up. When we truly accepted that nobody would, that indeed nobody could listen to us, we began to get desperate. Mere words were not enough to make them understand. Anton had a gun, and he sat with Bill across from us at our living room table. Normally it was where we played board games, but now it was our war table. Spread across it was a map of our town with a spot circled and a route highlighted. "Look," Anton explained, "the mayor lives close. He drives past our block every day." And Bill had a hunting rifle. "Yeah, but all he sees is a normal street. We have to force him to take a different route to work. He has to drive through our street and see it for himself." Ida was wary. Unlike my roommates, she was not used to guns. Next to me, she asked, "What are the guns for?" I wasn't too comfortable with the weapons either, but I knew. If the diversion to make him turn down our street doesn't work, you guys are going to force the issue, aren't you? "It's only a matter of time," Bill responded. "Something was digging at Ethan's house and it almost got in, and we're not going to let his daughters get hurt again. His family's been through enough." With a fierce expression, Anton nodded in agreement. I intended to make sure the guns weren't needed. The use of force would only damage our cause. To avoid that risk, we just had to make a good enough diversion. And then the mayor would see and he would call in the troops and civilization would back us up against our local nightmare. That morning, we waited at our T intersection with 2 cars ready to go. Bill stood far ahead watching for the mayor's car, and when he gave us the signal, our 2 drivers rolled forward and simulated a minor accident that just happened to leave the road blocked. I saw the mayor in his car as he came closer. He had his phone out, but he saw the obstacle and drove up partially on the curb, cutting past us completely. Without so much as a look back, he drove on down the road, still texting on his phone. Idol shouted after him, "Are you serious?" I rationalized. Maybe he's in a rush to get to work. There was no way to anticipate what time he would return home, so we were forced to reconvene the next morning. This time, we got all the cooped-up neighborhood children to just happen to walk across these streets slowly at the proper time. They were just excited to play outside in the sunlight, so they happily went along with pretending that they were on their way to school together. Ida was the scout this time, and when she gave the signal, we blocked the road and the sidewalk too, with a string of children holding hands. Half on his phone, the mayor nearly ran them over. Eyes wide, he reversed completely and drove the opposite direction, leaving the scene as quickly as possible. My roommate threw up his hands. "This freaking guy, man." "We probably spooked him with that near miss," I offered. On the 3rd day, the neighbors had waited long enough. A bunch of men jumped out in front of the mayor's car, forcing him to screech to a halt, and Anton approached with his gun out and ready. Finally, the mayor had noticed us and he dropped his phone and raised his hands in his car. Anton shouted, "Get out." The mayor slowly slid out and stood, keeping his hands raised. "I've got money, I've got kids too. My name's Liam, my kids are gonna ask where." Bill pressed his hunting rifle to the mayor's back. "Shut up. We don't want your money. We're going to walk 30 feet in that direction." He came around and nodded his head down our street. "And then you're going to come back to this car and continue on with your life. You got it?" Liam looked confused. "That's all? Why?" "You won't understand until you see. Just walk." We trailed the group of armed men as they escorted Liam down the center of our street. From our perspective, they simply walked along normal pavement on normal traces of snow and ice. Somewhere around where I knew the square of permanent darkness began, the men reacted subtly, and Liam threw his arms wide. You could hear him shout, "What? What the heck is this? What's happening?" But he was just standing there in the middle of a sunlit street for all that we could see. Bill and Anton held him roughly in place and began saying inaudible but quite angry things. One of them pointed ahead. "What? Oh God, what is that?" Idol and I looked at each other. We knew instinctively that they were holding him in place while that fearful presence began to wake within. Out where we were, there was nothing but a chilly breeze. But in there, the mayor began to scream. The longest that any of us had stayed out in the unhallowed pitch was 7 minutes, and that had been by accident. The old woman who had fallen had started to scream in abject terror, and the 2 men who had run out to grab her returned with wild looks in their eyes, and a feeling, according to them, that they had just barely escaped, fully waking the horror out in the unknown reaches of that world. One of my roommates asked, "It's been 5 minutes, right? How long are they going to keep him in there?" I looked at my phone. 5 minutes, 10 seconds. Bill and Anton held the mare fast as he began to writhe in absolute panic. 5 minutes and 40 seconds. "Guys," Idle yelled, "do not do more." She cursed as they ignored him. 6 minutes. I began to prepare for some action that I hadn't decided upon yet, but a feeling of slowly waking awareness reached us as we stood there, and the world became dark. Immediately, adrenaline poured pure alarm into my voice. "Bill, Anton, we're inside of it now too. The black square got bigger." 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Processing what we meant, they turned toward us in shock. The abject terror those 2 men and that old woman had told us about was no joke. A beast, the likes of which the world had never seen, stirred in its sleep, on the verge of opening whatever it had for eyes, and it would know us and crush us. Idle screamed, and Bill and Anton and their men dragged the mare as fast as they could towards us. Just as the fear reached a point of ultimate panic within me, I followed them 2 feet down the road. We stood under the sun on bright white snow, panting and breathing and trying not to vomit. Composing himself but still red-faced, Liam grabbed several of us by the shoulders in turn and looked us in our eyes. "You're the crazy people, the ones that are bothering everyone, but you're not crazy, are you? That," he pointed, "is what you live in every single day." I couldn't help myself. I actually began to cry a little bit. "Yes," I breathed, misty-eyed, matching his gaze as he clasped my shoulders. "Do you understand now?" "I do." He looked back at our street wide-eyed. "I do, my God. Something has to be done about this right now. I'll call the military. I'll get the National Guard here. We'll get all the scientists. We'll fight this." To be heard, to be understood, to have our plight shared. The feeling of freedom and hope was incredible, and we saw Liam to his car and celebrated amongst ourselves as he drove off to City Hall. The police intercepted Bill at the same intersection the next morning, arresting him for attacking the mare. One of our neighbors saw it happening and group texted us. We swarmed outside and ran through the darkness into the daylight, and approached the 2 cop cars where Bill was being handcuffed. One officer continued to restrain him while the other 3 got out their weapons. "All of you stay back. We'll arrest you too if you interfere." Bill's men began shouting, and Anton in particular got aggressive with one of the cops. In response, one radioed for backup, and the situation looked to be escalating toward violence. I tried to hold back my neighbors as best I could while asking the cops, "What is this? The mayor said that he would help us." The police officer looked me right in the eyes and said with no hint of compassion, "He was just saying that to get away from you." "You cannot be real right now," Anton shouted. "Take 10 steps that way and tell us what you see." One of the officers grabbed out to cuff him too, but Anton retreated. "Oh, come on, get me." Anton led a small chase, and 2 officers charged after him, and he led them across the threshold, where they stopped and stared around at what I knew to be sudden darkness. We had told the police about our story multiple times over the past few weeks, so they had to know that they were witnessing what we had been talking about. "You see it, don't you see?" Anton continued to dance and shout and point at them. "Do you see it?" Their reaction after a few moments of horrified paralysis was to grab him, haul him back to the normal world, and to cuff him beside Bill. The other officers hadn't missed their moment of confusion. One asked, Fred, what was that?" Fred was obviously shaken to the point of physical trembling, but he just replied, "Nothing, these people are all liars." "You sure? It really looked like you saw something." They're liars, all right, it's all BS. And as we stood, stupefied, and watched them drive away with Bill and Anton, we had no idea what to think or say to each other. We had brought them to our situation and made them see, but they'd just, how could they just? As we stood there on the corner, light pulsed away in favor of darkness. The black square had expanded once more. We didn't even have the luxury of standing still in shock. We had to move. That familiar, choking, otherworldly atmosphere made sure of that. Idol squeezed my hand once out of shared hopelessness, and then all of us ran back to our separate houses. We could do nothing but sit and listen to the unseen creatures outside as they snuffled around in search of the source of the commotion that we had made. That night, I sat in the kitchen staring down at our piles of forms, holding my head in my hands. The black square was something bad or negative made manifest. Was it human anger, hate, strife? It had gotten bigger twice that we knew of, around the times that violence had been threatened. But it was not just our problem anymore. Over the next few weeks, when I left my house to go to work, I noted the exact limit of the black square. For 5 days, it remained at the corner where Anton and Bill had been arrested. The mayor no longer took a morning route past us, so I knew that he was unaware that the limit had expanded that weekend to cover the perpendicular pavement as well. Our town was small, a mere footnote in the world, but I had a feeling those in power would want to know that our problem would eventually become their problem. I stopped by City Hall that Monday to yell bitterly in the lobby that the black square was expanding. The mayor himself came to shout me down and tell everybody that I was a liar, and order me arrested. I ran to my car and drove for the darkness, now a haven of safety from detainment, and I found that the border had expanded yet again. The people that lived in the houses perpendicular to ours came out under their lawns and stared around at the early fall of night. I screamed at them out of my car window to go inside, and they listened once that feeling of abject terror that I knew well began to creep upon them. And now, a second community was slowly joining us in perpetual isolation and fear. Together with this new blood, we stormed the rest of town, not with violence, which would just make the black square bigger, but with peaceful protest. We pasted flyers everywhere stating simply, "The black square is growing." And because Bill had gotten out on bail, others we posted stated, "Free Anton." We gathered outside of City Hall, making sure to stay in designated protest zones to avoid the threat of arrest. The mayor hurried past us each morning and eventually began taking a back entrance. We shouted at passers-by that our problem was becoming their problem. Well, they ignored us until the 3rd and 4th Street. Those parallel on either side of the expanding square joined us in our crusade. But nobody listened, and the black square started to expand at a faster rate. It was as if our efforts to raise awareness were only making the corruption stronger. How could positivity strengthen darkness? I mean, it didn't make sense. We were fighting to warn these people, not out of hate or spite, but out of compassion and hope. The final tipping point happened roughly 6 months after the inexplicable earth-shaking horn blast that had first heralded the coming of darkness over our community. All told, 4 full blocks and hundreds of people now lived in rotting darkness every single day. And as our numbers grew, so did our ferocity. Hope had become bitterness. Compassion had become anger. We were a veritable daily crowd outside of City Hall, and we often saw officials and police officers nervously studying us to try to figure out what to do. But the final tipping point was Liam's fault. The mayor, as he called himself, despite ignoring half his constituents. For the first time, the media had taken notice of our little town, but not because of our growing curse. Our economy had taken a dip because half our population spent all their free time huddled in fear inside their houses, and a film crew for a news channel in the city had become to do a quick report. I could tell the reporter had no idea what she had signed up for. She and her camera guy slowed 10 feet from their van and stared at us. I could see her asking the mayor what was going on and pointing at us. The attention brought forth boos and shouts from the people around me, and Idol next to me looked around nervously. With rage, "Free Anton!" With fear, "The black square is growing!" And with vehemence, "You can't ignore this forever!" The reporter regarded us for a moment and then asked politely, "Hey, clearly, hey, hey." Our assembled dozen slowly quieted down and she continued, "What's going on here?" Too many people began talking at once. While she tried to decipher what we were protesting, some of us sent texts and made calls, telling everyone that a film crew was here. The citizens of the affected neighborhoods began arriving in droves, swelling our numbers from dozens to hundreds. The mayor made calls of his own, and one by one cop cars began to pull up. They had expanded the force in recent months because of us, and I guessed it was in preparation for a moment exactly like this one. "Well, hey," the reporter finally told us, "we're gonna do our scheduled interview with the mayor here, and then we'll swing back and talk to y'all. How about that?" We must have looked eerie staring at her like that. Nobody had offered us hope in so long that we hardly recognized the sight of it. Our crowd watched her ascend the steps of City Hall, fix her hair, and begin filming the mayor. She began by asking a few standard-seeming questions, but then she got to a question about the downturn in our area. "Mayor, isn't economic policy for the local industrial region a major portion of what you do here? Is any part of this the fault of City Hall?" Even from our distance, I could see his face change. His polite smile fell as his mask had cracked, and he swept a hand out towards us, directing the camera to follow. Quite clearly and loudly he answered, "It's really the fault of certain lazy demographics around here. Some people just don't want to work." The people around me reacted as if struck. I could physically feel their surprise, shock, and affront move through me like a wave. Idol grabbed my arm, and this was bad. A few shouted angrily. And clearly at his breaking point after months of our persistent efforts, the mayor forgot himself and shouted in response, "Oh, go back to your trash communities and cry about it." Dead silence fell. Opposite of us, even the cops stared up the steps aghast. In one fell comment, the mayor had succinctly informed us that the local government would never listen to us. It wasn't that they couldn't understand, they did. They had seen it with their own eyes. It was that they didn't want to listen. They didn't just not like us, they hated us. But why? Why were we hated for having a problem that we couldn't do anything about? Yeah, we had clashed a time or two, but to hate us, I mean, why? We were fellow humans. We weren't trying to tear them down. We weren't trying to take away what was theirs. The cops had backed him up on it. How could they all despise us? I held on to Idol's body as hundreds of roaring neighbors charged forward around us. She screamed as I took several heavy hits from accidental collisions. The crowd surged up the steps as Liam ran with the reporter and her cameraman. The police ran after them, batons and guns out. The crowd pinned him against the large wooden doors of City Hall, but amazingly, the first 5 men to reach the mayor turned and held their arms out in defense of him. The crowd slowed, stopped, and clenched their fists against their own bloodthirsty rage, but no violence followed. Surprised as well, the cops held back. In a wide line at the base of the steps, they waited. Those quick-thinking men at the front slowly urged everybody back, and Liam dusted his suit off and fixed his hair while he came to terms with the fact that he wasn't about to be beaten to death. The police put their weapons away and held up their hands peacefully, and they worked their way through the crowd until they were able to form a protective ring around the mayor and disperse the sea of people. "Go home," the chief yelled with relief, prodding individuals with a polite finger. "Go home, there's nothing to see here, go home." One man asked calmly, "Can we get Anton out of jail, please?" The chief nodded and turned away to make a call on his radio. Idol and I remained in place, still stunned that violence hadn't broken out. For a good 10 minutes, the bulk of the crowd dispersed, and then the reporter resumed her interview. She asked, "Would you like to tell us anything about this black square issue?" The crowd seems quite motivated to get someone to listen. Behind his protective ring of police, Liam gave a polite nod and said to the camera, "Oh, that's nothing, just a prank locals like to make. A tall tale, you know, a lie." I felt it before it happened. The reporter, her cameraman, and the police looked around in awed confusion at the sudden night that had fallen upon us. The rest of us didn't waste any time. We had 7 minutes to get inside, and we had been trained to react instantly. We ran for our lives through the darkness. All that Idle and I could do was take refuge in my car until the screaming was over. We huddled, head down, arms over our ears and eyes closed, as that terrifying and monstrous presence finally woke when the half of the town that didn't know failed to seek shelter in time. The cars shook and bounced around us as slow and enormous steps crashed their way past us. We dared not look or move. Our one hope was that it could not sense the two of us if we stayed separate from the cloying darkness and made no move or sound. Out on the steps of City Hall, men shouted and women shrieked. Some made it inside, that much I could tell. When it was finally over and the beast went back to sleep somewhere out in the eternal night, my headlights showed massive divots in cement and human-sized trails of blood that stretched down the steps and out of sight, as if an unthinkable number of people had simply been swept away by one giant, uncaring claw. In physical shock, it was all that I could do to turn the ignition and drive home. We pulled into the garage, hit the remote to close the door behind us, and sat crying and shouting incoherently at one another. And then, like always, life had to continue. Work resumed, just inside instead of outdoors. The grocery store was outside the black square, so the growers still brought food in from outlying farms, none the wiser. But I don't know how long that will last. Because, you see, I figured it out. The darkness isn't fueled by violence, for creatures of claws and azure ichor eat one another inside it with no effect. The darkness isn't fueled by despair, for we practically stank of hopelessness for much of our time before it began to expand. It wasn't the fighting or the misery or the conflict. It was fueled by a choice. It grew bigger every time somebody chose to ignore it or deny it. It grew the most when someone chose to knowingly lie about it. And thus, our horrible paradox. Trying to make people aware of the problem like I'm doing by writing this, it just makes it worse. The more people hear about it, the less they want to hear about it, and the bigger that it gets. But I have to try. As I sit here watching our state governor tell everybody on the city news that our town has no black square, that we are lying and that the black square doesn't exist, I see a death spiral. As we ran in a spiral that first dark morning out of fear, as we made it worse by trying to make it better, I see a train of madness with no conductor on a track headed towards a cliff. Thus I say to you, knowing full well our shared doom, that the world will be choked in denial then lies all the faster for my warning. Neighbor, the black square is growing.